A story about the rescues we never see coming. She looked at his cheap suit and told security to remove him. 40 minutes later, he walked out of a burning building carrying her unconscious daughter against his chest. The same hand she had dismissed, the same man she had humiliated in front of 200 guests who witnessed every word. Audrey Carrington had built an empire deciding who belonged in her world and who didn't. That night, the smoke didn't care about her money. The fire didn't negotiate with her title. And the man she had thrown out of her gala became the only person standing between her daughter and something she couldn't fix with a phone call. Well, if this kind of story moves you, the ones about quiet strength, hidden pasts, and the people we almost walked away from, subscribe to this channel right now and follow every part of this story to the very end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us the city and country where you're watching from. Every single comment means the world to us, and we love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. The invitation had come through the Veterans Outreach Program at the Community Center on 48th Street, a small cardstock envelope with gold lettering that Maddie had immediately decided was the most beautiful piece of mail she had ever seen. Logan Barrett held it between two fingers while she stood on the kitchen chair, trying to read it upside down. "What's it say, Dad? Is it a party?" "It's a charity event," he told her, "for a new hospital, a kid's one." "Are we charity?" He put the envelope down on the counter. "We're guests. That's different." Maddie considered this for a moment the way 8-year-olds considered everything, with one eye slightly squinted and her mouth twisted to the side. Then she slid off the chair and went back to her homework without further comment, which Logan had learned over the years meant she had accepted the answer but reserved the right to revisit it later. He almost didn't go. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror the evening of the event in his one good suit, a dark navy that had fit him better 3 years ago before he'd started doing less field work and more desk scheduling, and thought about the 47 things he could be doing with a Saturday night that didn't involve standing in a room full of people who made more money in a quarterly report than he'd earned in his entire service career. But Maddie had already put on her green dress with the white buttons. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded, waiting. So they went. The Hartwell Grand wasn't the kind of building Logan visited professionally, though he'd worked in buildings that served the same class of people. Marble lobbies, chandelier rigging that required 6 maintenance cycles per year, HVAC systems so precisely calibrated that even a 2-degree fluctuation triggered an automated alert. He noticed all of this when he walked through the entrance, not because he was impressed, because that was simply how his brain worked. It cataloged spaces the way other people cataloged faces. Maddie held his hand and stared upward at the lights. "It's like inside a crown," she whispered. "Don't let go of me," he said. "Dad, I'm 8. Don't let go of me." She didn't argue that time. The ballroom was already packed when they arrived. A slow crush of expensive fabric and rehearsed laughter, of women who moved through crowds as though crowds existed for the sole purpose of partying around them, and men who spoke loudly enough to be overheard without appearing to try. A string quartet was positioned near the far wall playing something classical that Logan couldn't name. The program table near the VIP entrance had 2 lines, one for general guests and one for VIP registrants. And the woman managing the VIP section had the particular practiced expression of someone doing a job that required them to be simultaneously polite and evaluating at all times. Logan had Maddie's hand in his left and their invitation in his right. They stood in the general line for several minutes before a young man in a catering uniform bumped backward into Logan while carrying a tray and sent an entire set of napkin rings scattering across the polished floor. Logan spent the next 3 minutes gathering them up and returning them, by which point the line had moved, and they were now standing, accidentally, and without having made a conscious decision about it, near the edge of the VIP entrance. This was the precise moment Audrey Carrington saw him. She had been moving at a pace that her assistant, Renata, privately referred to as the operational tempo, which meant that Audrey was simultaneously aware of 12 things happening in the room and was mentally addressing 7 of them while appearing to give her full attention to whoever she was speaking with at any given second. It was not a performance. It was genuinely how she processed a room. She had been doing it since she was 22 years old, fresh from her MBA, walking into boardrooms where nobody expected her to last longer than a quarter. She saw Logan Barrett the way she might notice a structural inconsistency in a building plan, not with hostility, but with the particular alertness of someone whose job was to notice when something didn't fit the expected pattern. The suit was wrong, not offensive, not dirty, just not right for this room, in the way that a hardware store hammer was not wrong as an object, simply incorrect for performing surgery. The man wearing it was tall, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of stillness about him that she associated with either extreme confidence or extreme exhaustion. The little girl beside him was asleep, standing upright and asleep, her head against his arm, one shoe slightly untied. He had noticed the untied shoe. She could see him trying to figure out how to bend down and fix it without waking her. Audrey turned to her head of security, a compact, efficient man named Gerald, who had worked for Carrington Development for 11 years. "That man near the VIP entrance," she said quietly. "He's in the wrong line." Gerald looked back at her. "Should I? Please." She had already moved on to the next conversation before Gerald reached him. This was not cruelty. This was, in Audrey Carrington's framework, correct resource allocation. The VIP entrance existed to manage capacity. Gerald existed to enforce it. The situation was being handled. She didn't watch what happened next. Logan saw the security guard coming and understood what it meant immediately. There was no moment of confusion, no wounded pride that needed processing. He had grown up in a household where pride was something you earned, not something you carried around looking for opportunities to display. He simply looked at Gerald, looked at Maddie, asleep against his arm, looked once more at the gold lettering on the invitation that he was still technically holding, and made a quiet calculation. He could show Gerald the invitation. He could explain the veterans program. He could probably get the situation resolved in under 2 minutes if he chose to. He also could just not. "We're heading out," Logan said before Gerald had even reached him. Gerald slowed. "Sir, I was just—" "It's fine." Logan adjusted Maddie's weight against his shoulder. "She's tired anyway." He turned toward the exit. Maddie stirred slightly, not waking, her fingers tightening around the lapel of his jacket in that unconscious, reflexive grip that she had had since she was an infant. The grip that meant, even in sleep, "I know you're there." He was approximately 30 feet from the main ballroom exit when the building swallowed the sound of the string quartet and gave back something different. The explosion came from above. Not the enormous cinematic kind, not a fireball or a concussive blast that knocked people off their feet. It was a sharp percussive crack followed immediately by a sustained electrical scream, the kind of sound that happens when a high-voltage system fails catastrophically and takes 3 secondary systems with it in the process. Logan had heard variations of that sound in places that did not appear on unclassified maps. His body knew what to do before his brain finished assembling the information. He dropped into a crouch, turning his body to put himself between Maddie and the direction of the sound. She woke, startled, and made a small panicked sound that he absorbed by pulling her into his chest and pressing her head down. "Eyes closed," he said quietly. "I've got you." The ballroom went completely dark. For approximately 4 seconds there was absolute silence, the particular silence that large crowds produce in the first moment of genuine shock, when 200 people stop breathing at once. Then the emergency lighting kicked on in deep red pulses, and the silence broke, and everything became very loud all at once. Smoke appeared at the upper level almost immediately. Not heavy black smoke, not yet, but the thin gray kind that carries heat and moves fast through circulation systems and is considerably more dangerous than it looks when you don't know what's feeding it. Logan stood up. He had Maddie against his left side. He also began, without consciously deciding to, orienting himself within the building. The main exit was behind him, now clogged with guests surging backward from the interior. 2 emergency exits to his left, 1 to his right. He had clocked them when they arrived, the way he clocked every exit in every space he entered, the same way he still checked under cars in parking garages, and still sat facing doors in restaurants, and still sometimes woke at 3 a.m. cataloging the structural weaknesses of whatever building he was sleeping in. Old habit, old training. You didn't stop doing it just because the context changed. What he also noticed, in the same sweep, was the ballroom map mounted behind glass on the near wall, a fire safety diagram, the kind that building codes required and most guests never read, and the fact that the smoke coming from the upper level was moving toward the east corridor rather than the west, which told him something specific about which ventilation systems had failed and which were still operational. He was reading all of this in approximately the time it took everyone around him to start screaming. Then he heard the voice. It cut through the noise the way a frequency cuts through static, not louder exactly, but with a clarity that his nervous system registered as different. Sophie, Sophie, where is my... A pause, then louder. Where is my daughter? Gerald. Gerald, where is Sophie? He didn't know who Sophie was. He didn't know who Gerald was. He was looking for the source of the voice because the voice was the kind of voice that came from someone trying to stay controlled while something catastrophic happened to them internally. And he had spent enough time in enough bad situations to know that the people making that particular sound were the people who needed a specific kind of help. He found her by following the wake she was cutting through the crowd. Audrey Carrington was not the composed executive he had seen near the VIP entrance 20 minutes earlier. That woman had been assembled, every element deliberate and correct. This woman was assembled only at the surface, and the surface was visibly starting to crack. She was moving against the crowd toward the interior, her dress wrong for the pace she was trying to maintain, her eyes scanning faces with the particular desperation of someone who already knew the answer was bad and was still not prepared to accept it. 2 security personnel had her by the arms, not restraining her, containing her, steering her toward the exit the way you steered someone who would not willingly go. "Ma'am, we need to get you outside. My daughter is in there." Her voice cracked on the last word. Just slightly. She caught it immediately. Sophie was with Nadia. They went upstairs before the... Gerald, surveillance shows her going where? Say it again. Gerald, the same man who had come to remove Logan from the VIP entrance, was on a radio and looking at something on a phone simultaneously. His face had the controlled expression of a professional trying to process genuinely bad news without transmitting panic. "Service corridor, east side, upper level," he said. "She went in just before it happened. The door's probably jammed from the pressure change." "East side, upper level." Logan looked at the building map still mounted on the wall beside him. He looked at the smoke pattern. He looked at Maddie, now fully awake and watching his face with the specific attention that children paid to their parents' faces in scary situations, reading him for information about how afraid to be. He made a decision. He turned to the nearest security officer, not Gerald, a younger one standing 3 feet away, and said in a tone that did not invite discussion, "Hold her. Don't put her down. Stay near that east exit." He transferred Maddie into the man's arms with the practiced efficiency of someone who had passed an unconscious body through a helicopter door in high winds. Maddie grabbed the security officer's jacket and looked back at Logan with wide eyes. "Dad." "Right behind you," he said. "I need to do something first." He was already moving. "But, hey!" The voice behind him was sharp. "Hey, stop." He didn't stop. "What are you... Who are you?" Audrey Carrington was staring at him. She had pulled free of the security personnel, or they had let her go in the confusion. She was 3 feet from Logan and looking at him with the expression of someone trying to process an extreme amount of information very quickly. "What are you doing?" Logan didn't slow down. He was at the building map, tracing the east service corridor with one finger, measuring distances and angles. "Your daughter went up the east service corridor," he said. "That corridor runs parallel to the main duct system. The smoke's moving west, which means east ventilation is partially intact. She can breathe in there, but not for long once the secondary systems fail." He looked at the diagram. "There's a maintenance access panel on the 3rd level that connects to that corridor from the outside. It's not on the guest map. Building like this, built 1987, renovated 2004. There'll be an emergency equipment room 2 floors up that still has a functional stairwell if the main junction hasn't blown yet." Audrey stared at him. He looked at her directly, just once. "I'm going to find her. Firefighters are 8 minutes away minimum." He said it without cruelty, just fact. "The secondary electrical failure in that section is probably going to reach the east corridor in 6, maybe 7 if the fire suppression in the mechanical room is still functional." He looked at the smoke again. "It's not functional. That's why it's moving that direction." He turned and walked toward the interior corridor. "Wait. Wait." She moved to follow him. 2 of her security team caught her. "Let me go." "Let me..." "Logan Barrett, or whoever you are, you wait." He was already through the door. She didn't know his name yet. He hadn't given it to her. She must have heard it from somewhere, or misread a badge, or simply invented it in the chaos. It didn't matter. The door closed behind him. The smoke was thicker on the other side. Logan Barrett pulled his jacket up over his nose, took a full inventory breath, and started climbing. The east stairwell was exactly where the building diagram said it would be, which was the first good piece of information he'd had in the past 9 minutes. The second was that the emergency lighting in this section was battery-backed on a separate circuit, older, flickering, but holding. He could see. The third piece of information was bad. When he reached the third level and found the maintenance access panel, he could already smell the heat coming through the wall on the other side. Not from this corridor. From the junction room adjacent to it. The junction room that he had correctly identified as the point of origin for the secondary failure. He pressed the back of his hand against the access panel before touching the latch. An old habit, muscle memory from training scenarios that had stopped being scenarios a long time ago. Not unbearable. Hot, but not unbearable. He opened it. The service corridor on the other side was gray with smoke, visibility down to maybe 8 feet. The ventilation was partially intact, the way he'd read it from the map. There was still a slow circulation of cleaner air from the west-facing intake, but the smoke level was rising faster than he'd estimated. He had less time than he'd told Audrey. "Sophie," he said it at a controlled volume. Not a shout. Sound traveled oddly in smoke-filled corridors, and shouting used oxygen. "Sophie, can you hear me?" Nothing. He moved deeper into the corridor, keeping low, using the wall as a guide. There were 3 doors on the east side, storage. A mechanical closet. A third door, heavier, steel-framed. A fire door that was supposed to prevent exactly this kind of situation, but the pressure differential from the explosion had done something to the frame, warped it slightly, so the door looked closed but was not latched. He pushed it. On the other side, in a small equipment room full of cleaning supplies and folded tablecloths, Sophie Carrington was on the floor. She was 9 years old. She was wearing a pale blue dress and 1 shoe. The other was 3 feet away, knocked off, probably from the fall, because she had fallen. She had hit her head on the metal edge of a shelving unit when the explosion shook the building, and she had been unconscious long enough for the smoke to deepen around her. Logan moved. He was beside her in 2 steps, down on 1 knee, 2 fingers at her neck. Pulse, present, irregular but present. Then at her airway, then checking the head wound with the particular economy of motion that happened when training replaced panic in the hierarchy of response. The wound was bleeding, but not critically. The unconsciousness was more concerning. He didn't have equipment. He didn't have anything except his hands and what he knew. "Okay," he said quietly, not to her. She wasn't awake to hear it, but to himself. The way he'd always talked himself through the gap between a bad situation and a worse one. "Okay, let's go." He stripped off his jacket, folded it once, pressed it carefully against the wound on her head. Then he gathered her against his chest. Her weight was nothing, practically nothing, small and warm and breathing, and turned back toward the corridor. The smoke was significantly worse in the 90 seconds he'd been inside the room. He went low and moved fast. The maintenance passage on the north end of the corridor was the longest 20 feet of the evening. He moved through it with Sophie against his chest and his hand on the wall, and the smoke burning his eyes down to slits, counting steps, trusting geometry when visibility was gone. The emergency stairwell connected to an unfinished section of the building, new construction, open framing, exposed concrete, and he went down 2 flights and through a heavy side door that pushed outward into the cold air with a sound like something releasing its breath. He stood on a service access path along the building's north face. The crowd, the ambulances, the fire trucks that had arrived 3 minutes too late to be useful to him, all of them were on the other side of the building. He moved toward them. He heard Audrey before he saw her. She had broken from her security team again. She was standing at the corner of the building, and she saw him the moment he came around it. He watched the specific sequence of expressions move across her face, recognition, then confusion, then a collapse of something that she had clearly been holding extremely tightly for the past 12 minutes. He walked to the paramedics and told them, in the flat, specific language of someone who had delivered field assessments in places without hospitals for 300 miles, exactly what he had found, what he had observed about her condition, his estimate of how long she had been unconscious, the nature and location of the head wound, and what he had done. The paramedics were already moving before he finished. Audrey was beside him. She was not touching him. She was looking at Sophie in a way that made it very clear that the billionaire executive function of her brain had completely vacated the premises and something far more fundamental had taken its place. After a long moment, she spoke. "Who are you?" Logan was watching the paramedics work. He was also watching Maddie, who had been allowed to come forward by the security officer and was now standing 5 feet away, looking at Logan with that particular expression she got when she had been scared and hadn't told him. He looked back at Audrey. "Just her dad," he said. He meant Maddie. Then he walked to his daughter, picked her up even though she was technically too old for it, and held her without explaining anything. The paramedics loaded Sophie into the ambulance. Audrey still hadn't moved from where he'd left her. She was watching him. He could feel it. And whatever she was thinking as she stood there looking at the man she had ordered removed from her gala, the man who had come back through the smoke carrying the things she could not live without, it was different from whatever she had been thinking 2 hours ago when she'd looked at his suit and made her quiet, certain, incorrect decision. He didn't look back at her. Not yet. The ambulance left without her. That was the detail that stayed with Audrey afterward. Not the smoke still rising from the upper floors of the Hartwell Grand, not the paramedics loading her daughter into the back of a vehicle with the quiet urgency of people who had learned to move fast without looking rushed. Not even the strange man who had handed her daughter back to the world like it was something ordinary. What stayed was the specific moment when the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, and Audrey was standing on a service access path in $400 shoes with nowhere to put her hands. Gerald was beside her with her coat. She didn't remember him retrieving it. "The car is ready," he said. "We can follow directly." She didn't answer immediately. She was still looking at the spot where Logan Barrett had been standing. He had handed Maddie back to the security officer, or reclaimed her, really, the transfer in both directions executed with a calm efficiency that felt deeply practiced. And now he was crouched beside his daughter on a concrete ledge near the building's north wall, talking to her quietly. Maddie had her arms around his neck. One shoe was still untied. Audrey turned toward the car. "Which hospital?" she asked. "Mercy General. It's 6 minutes. Get Hargrove on the phone. Tell him we're coming." Dr. Hargrove was the head of pediatric neurology at Mercy General, a position he held partly because of his credentials and partly because Carrington Development had funded the department's last significant expansion. Audrey was not above using the tools available to her, and right now every tool she had was pointed in one direction. She was almost at the car when she stopped. She turned back. Logan Barrett was helping Maddie retie her shoe. Audrey stood there for a moment in a way that was not like her, undecided, which was a condition she tolerated very poorly and tried never to demonstrate in public. Then she walked back. He looked up when he heard her footsteps. "Mr. Barrett." She didn't know why she used his name. She still wasn't entirely certain where she'd gotten it. She might have heard someone say it near the registration table, or it might have been on the Veterans Program list that her events coordinator had shown her last week. Her brain collected information without always flagging the source. "Yeah," he said, not standing, just acknowledging. "Will you come to the hospital?" She said it as a complete sentence, without preamble, because she had learned very early that preamble gave people time to construct refusals. "I'd like to. I want Sophie to see you when she wakes up, so she knows who." She stopped, restarted. "I'd like you there." He looked at Maddie, who was looking at Audrey with the frank, unguarded assessment that children applied to strangers. "She's going to be fine," he said. And it wasn't reassurance. It wasn't the placating kind of statement that people delivered when they didn't actually know the answer. It had the quality of information. The head wound bled more than it damaged. Her pulse was irregular because of the shock and the smoke inhalation, but her airway was clear by the time I reached her. "She's going to have a headache for 4 or 5 days and they'll want to watch her overnight, but she's going to be fine." Audrey stared at him. "How do you know that?" He didn't answer that question. He looked at Maddie again. "You hungry?" Maddie nodded. "There's probably a vending machine at the hospital." He stood up. "We'll follow behind." Mercy General's emergency intake at 11:30 on a Saturday night was its own particular version of controlled disorder. The waiting area had the fluorescent-lit, slightly abraded quality of a space that processed too much human difficulty on a daily basis to maintain any surface pleasantness. Scuffed linoleum, Chairs bolted to the floor in configurations that seemed designed to discourage comfort. A television mounted in the corner, cycling through a local news channel that had already picked up footage from the Hartwell Grand. Logan sat with Maddie in the row of chairs nearest the vending machines, which he had located within 40 seconds of entering the building. Maddie had a package of peanut butter crackers and was eating them with the focused attention of someone making a serious project out of it. She had stopped asking questions, which was either because she had processed everything she needed to process or because she was saving them for a more private location. With Maddie, it was usually the second option. He had smoke still in the creases of his knuckles. He'd washed his hands twice at the intake sink, but it was in the skin, that particular gray chemical smell that meant electrical fire and old insulation. His jacket was somewhere in the building. He'd left it upstairs, pressed against Sophie's head wound, which was where it had needed to be and therefore where it stayed. Across the waiting room, Audrey was not sitting. She was standing near the nurse's station in a posture that communicated, without aggression, that she was prepared to wait as long as necessary and would be waiting in that exact spot, so there would be no uncertainty about where to bring information when information became available. One of the charge nurses had given her a cup of coffee that she was holding without drinking. Renata, her assistant, had arrived somewhere in the previous 20 minutes and was managing the dozen things that apparently required managing even at midnight on an emergency night. Calls to the Carrington board, calls to the PR contact who had already seen the news footage, calls to Audrey's attorney for reasons that Logan didn't fully understand, but suspected were related to the Gala's liability structure. Logan watched all of this without appearing to watch it, which was another old habit. At 12:40, a doctor came through the swinging doors and spoke with Audrey for approximately 4 minutes. Logan read the conversation from across the room. Not the words, but the body language. The doctor's controlled delivery. Audrey's posture shifting from rigid to something fractionally looser. The moment when she pressed 2 fingers briefly to her mouth and then lowered them. Sophie was awake. Audrey turned and looked directly at Logan from across the room. Then she walked to him. "They said she's asking for her stuffed dog," Audrey said. Her voice was approximately 80% normal. "Which is still at the venue. Does she have a name for it?" Audrey blinked. "What?" "The dog. Does it have a name? Sometimes that helps. If you tell them the dog is safe and you used its name, it lands better than just, 'It's fine.'" A very strange expression crossed Audrey Carrington's face. Logan couldn't have named it precisely. It was somewhere in the vicinity of being caught off guard by something that she hadn't expected to affect her, and being slightly annoyed at herself for being affected. "His name is Corporal," she said. Logan looked at her. "She named him herself," Audrey said, with a faint defensive edge that was also not quite defensive. "She went through a phase. She named everything after military ranks. The cat was Major until we rehomed him." "She'll be okay," Logan said. "You said that already. You didn't fully believe it the first time." Audrey looked at him for a moment longer than was necessary, then looked away. "They'll let me go in shortly," she said. "Will you—" She stopped, started again. "Maddie is welcome to the family waiting room. It's quieter." "She's fine here," Logan said. "She's almost asleep." Maddie, who was in fact 3/4 asleep with her head on Logan's arm and the peanut butter crackers still loosely in one hand, produced a soft sound that was not quite a protest and not quite confirmation. "Thank you," Audrey said. She said it like someone operating in a language they were not entirely fluent in, which Logan suspected was not far from accurate. For what you did. I need to say it correctly because I did not behave well earlier, and I am aware of that, and you went anyway, and I need to say that correctly." "It doesn't need to be said correctly," Logan told her. "It just needs to be said once." She absorbed this. "It's been said," she told him. "Good," he said. "Go see your daughter." He didn't see her again until nearly 2 in the morning, when Renata came to find him in the waiting room with the specific targeted efficiency of someone who had been given an exact task and intended to execute it. She led him through a side corridor to a family consultation room that was slightly better than the main waiting area. A round table, actual chairs that weren't bolted to anything, a window that looked onto the hospital's small interior garden, which was dark at this hour, but at least represented the concept of the outdoors. Sophie was visible through a glass panel in the adjacent room. She was awake, propped against the raised bed with a monitoring lead on her finger and a clean bandage on the right side of her head, and a bored, slightly aggrieved expression that Logan associated with children who had been told to stay still and found the instruction unreasonable. She was talking to one of the nurses. Whatever she was saying was making the nurse laugh. "She wanted to meet you," Audrey said from behind him. She was standing near the table with a different cup of coffee. The third, he estimated, based on the slight over-precision of her movements. "She knows you're the one who found her. She's been asking." Logan turned from the window. "She can wait until morning. She needs to sleep." "I told her that." She said, and I am quoting directly, "Mom, I slept in the smoke. I'm not tired." Logan said nothing, but something shifted at the corner of his mouth. "She's 9, Audrey added. "She argues like a small attorney." "Kids who nearly get hurt go one of two ways," Logan said. "They either shut down or they overcompensate. Hers is the better kind." Audrey looked at him with the expression she'd been wearing, on and off, since the service access path, the trying to understand expression. "How do you know that? How do you know How did you know the ventilation was moving east? How did you know which door? How did you know the passage was there?" He sat down at the table, not deflecting, just taking a moment. "Building map, emergency diagram near the VIP entrance. People don't read those. I read everything when I walk into a room. That's not a habit regular people have." "No," he agreed. "It's not." The silence between them was not uncomfortable exactly, but it had weight. Audrey sat down across from him. She set her coffee on the table and looked at it rather than at him. "The paramedic asked me your assessment," she said, "the one you gave when you came out. He said," and he used the word precise. He said it was the most precise field assessment he'd received from a civilian in his 15-year career. She looked up. "That's a specific compliment from a specific kind of professional." He was being generous. He was being accurate. She kept looking at him. "Who are you, Logan Barrett?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a light came on somewhere in the interior garden. A maintenance worker, probably, doing a late round. "Right now," he said, "I'm the guy whose jacket is somewhere in your building." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. "We'll replace it." "You really don't have to." "It was used in the service of my daughter's medical care. I think I'm obligated." It wasn't a very good jacket. "I noticed," she said, and then, immediately, "That was rude, I'm sorry." "It's fine, you're right. It wasn't a very good jacket." He looked toward the window. "I don't spend a lot of money on clothes." "What do you spend money on?" He looked back at her. "Maddie's school. The apartment we're in is close to her school. Rent's higher than I'd like, but the walk is safe, and she can do it herself, which matters, because I'm sometimes at the building earlier than she leaves." He paused. "Books. She reads constantly. She goes through them faster than the library can keep up. And, well, art supplies. She's been drawing since she was 4, whatever she draws." Audrey was watching him with a different expression now, something quieter. "Sophie plays piano," she said. She's been playing since she was 5. I have a full calendar of her lessons, her recitals, her competitions. I have never once missed a recital." She said it like a defense, like a point she was scoring against herself. "I don't know if that means I'm a good mother or just an organized one." "Being there means something," Logan said, "even if you had to schedule it." "Did you schedule things? With Maddie? After her mother—" She stopped. "I'm sorry. I don't know enough about your situation to ask that." "You can ask." "Her mother?" Logan was quiet for a moment. There was a specific way he handled this topic. Not avoidant, not performed, just straightforward. The way you handled something you had processed as fully as it could be processed, but that still had its own weight. "She died when Maddie was 3. I was deployed. Her sister took Maddie for the 6 weeks it took me to finish the rotation and get home." He looked at his hands on the table. 6 weeks is a long time at 3. It took a while. For Maddie to feel like I was actually staying. She believed you might leave again." "Yeah." Audrey looked at her coffee. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it in the way that people meant it when they had no adequate language but weren't willing to say nothing. "It was a long time ago," Logan said. "We figured it out." From the adjacent room, through the glass panel, Sophie was now making a sustained and determined argument with her nurse about something involving the television remote. The nurse was winning, but Sophie was making her work for it. Logan watched and said, "She's going to be fine." "You've said it 3 times. The 3rd time I meant it about more than just tonight." Audrey looked at her daughter through the glass panel and said nothing. But some of the hours of the night showed in her face then. Not weakness, exactly. Just the particular exhaustion of a person who had been holding themselves very tightly for a very long time and was not entirely certain what happened when they eventually let go. Maddie fell fully asleep around 2:15 in the family waiting room on a couch that was considerably more comfortable than the main lobby chairs. Logan covered her with his shirt. He had a t-shirt underneath, he was fine, and sat in the chair beside her with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance. He thought about the explosion, not the chaos of it. He'd processed that efficiently while it was happening and didn't need to revisit it. He was thinking about the electrical pattern, the specific nature of the failure. He had been in the East Service corridor twice, once going in, once coming out, and he had noticed, in the corners of his attention, certain things that didn't align with a simple system malfunction. He had seen the main junction panel through the equipment room door. The panel had been open, not blown open. The damage pattern was wrong for an explosion originating at the junction itself. The hinges were intact. The internal breakers showed a very specific configuration of tripped and untripped circuits that didn't match the fire's apparent origin point. It bothered him the way structural inconsistencies bothered him, the way a wrong sound bothered him, the way things that didn't add up refused to sit quietly in the background of his mind until he understood why they didn't add up. He set it aside. For now. He set it in the specific mental drawer he kept for things that needed attention but couldn't be attended to immediately. Around 3 in the morning, Audrey came back to the family waiting room. She stopped when she saw Maddie asleep on the couch and Logan sitting beside her. "Sophie's asleep," she said quietly, so as not to wake Maddie. "Finally." "Good." She sat down in the chair on the other side of the couch. There were 3 chairs and a couch in the room. She chose the one nearest the window, which put her approximately 8 feet from Logan, which felt like the correct distance for 2 people who were strangers managing a strange situation. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't." "You don't have to be awake for anything right now." "I know." She looked at the window. "I'm aware that being awake doesn't change what's happening in the other room. I'm also aware that I am constitutionally unable to be asleep while my daughter is in a hospital bed 10 feet away." She paused. "Some limitations cannot be managed." He didn't argue with this. For a while they sat in silence that wasn't precisely comfortable but was at least honest. 2 people who didn't know each other, in a room they hadn't planned to be in, doing the thing they were both doing, which was staying close to the people they were responsible for. "My security director is going to want to speak with you tomorrow," Audrey said, "about what happened in the building, for the report." "Fine. He's also—" "I asked him to look into some things." She said it directly because Audrey Carrington's version of diplomacy was not softening statements but being precise about them. "About the explosion. I want to understand what happened." "So do I," Logan said. She looked at him. "The panel in the equipment room was open," he said. "Not blown open. 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 The damage pattern in the corridor didn't originate at the junction. Someone had accessed that panel before the event." The room went quietly still. "You're saying it wasn't an accident," Audrey said. "I'm saying it didn't look like one. I could be wrong." He looked at her steadily. "But I'm usually not wrong about this kind of thing." Audrey put down the coffee she'd been holding and sat forward. The billionaire executive had replaced the exhausted mother, which happened very fast, which Logan noted was both impressive and slightly concerning in the way of something that had become too automatic. "The building's electrical systems were inspected 4 months ago," she said. "Full compliance review, signed off by the city inspector." "Who runs the project?" "Carrington Development manages the development side. The rehabilitation center was a joint venture with one of my investment partners, Preston Vale. His firm handled construction and procurement." She said the name the way someone said the name of a person they trusted. Present tense, full confidence, no hesitation. Logan stored this the same way he stored everything, without reaction, without telegraphing that he'd stored it. "Was the inspection contractor chosen by Vale's firm?" he asked. A small pause. "I'd have to check." Worth checking. She looked at him for a long moment. You pulled my daughter out of a burning building. Now you're sitting in a hospital at 3 in the morning, suggesting that the building might have been deliberately compromised. She said it evenly, but there was an edge under it. Not at him. At the situation. That's a very complicated evening. Yeah, Logan said, it is. Why are you telling me this tonight, instead of waiting, talking to my security team, letting the official investigation? Because you asked me what I saw, he said simply, and you seemed like someone who preferred accurate information over comfortable information. Another long look. I do, she said. I always have. I know. How do you know that? You didn't pace, he said. Most people in your position tonight, something happens to their kid, they either freeze or they move in circles. You moved in straight lines. Even when security was holding you back, you were already calculating the next direct route. You don't comfort yourself by moving. You move because you've identified the next necessary thing. Audrey Carrington sat with this for a moment. That's not always a strength, she said, and there was something unguarded in it. A little seam of honesty that had probably been made wider by the hours and the coffee and the proximity to something that had frightened her genuinely. I know, Logan said, but it's useful in a crisis. Is that what this is? Still a crisis? He considered the question seriously, which she seemed to appreciate because she watched him do it. The acute part is over, he said. Sophie is going to wake up tomorrow with a headache and an excellent story to tell her friends. That part's fine. He looked at the window. The part I'm less certain about is whatever was happening in that equipment room before we all arrived. Gerald arrived at 7:15 with a preliminary report from the fire investigator on scene. Not the official report, which would take weeks, but the initial walkthrough summary that Gerald had specifically requested and received because Gerald had been Audrey's security director for 11 years and had learned early and thoroughly that Audrey Carrington did not want preliminary reports softened. He sat across from Audrey at the family room table while Logan stood near the window. Renata had brought actual coffee from the hospital's cafeteria rather than the machine in the hallway, which made a measurable difference to everyone present. Initial determination is equipment malfunction, Gerald said. Failed capacitor in the main distribution panel, cascade to the secondary systems. That's the initial determination, Audrey said. What's your read? Gerald was quiet for a moment, looked at his tablet. 3 of the panel's primary circuit breakers were in a configuration that our electrician, the one I called at 6 this morning, apologetically, described as inconsistent with a standard installation. He used the phrase intentional bypass and then took it back and said irregularity. Gerald looked up. He's not wrong to be careful. That's a significant accusation. But he's not wrong, Logan said from the window. Gerald looked at him. They had not been formally introduced, but Gerald had enough information about Logan Barrett by this point to understand the rough shape of the situation. The pattern you're describing, Logan said, bypass on the primary breakers, failure that initiates at the secondary rather than the primary. Someone set a condition and waited for it to trigger. It's not sophisticated. It's the kind of thing someone does when they need an event to look like an accident and they have enough access to the equipment beforehand to set it up. Access to the equipment, Audrey said. The panel was locked. Who had keys? Gerald looked at his tablet. Building management, the venue's maintenance staff, and the technical crew for the gala setup, catering and production, they were on site for 3 days. He paused. Also the Carrington Development Site Coordinator, since the venue is part of the rehabilitation project's fundraising infrastructure. Who is the site coordinator? Logan asked. A man named Dwyer. He reports to the Vale Group's project management office. Audrey set down her coffee slowly. The specific kind of slowly that meant something was lining up in her mind that she did not like. Pull everything on Dwyer, she said to Gerald, quietly. And I want the procurement records for the electrical systems in the rehabilitation center by end of day. Materials, suppliers, inspection certifications, the chain of custody on everything. Gerald nodded once and left. Audrey looked at Logan. You said last night you could be wrong, she said. I said it was possible. How possible? He thought about the panel, the open hinges, the specific configuration of the breakers, the way the smoke had moved, which had told him about the ventilation before he'd even checked the map, because the ventilation told a story about where the failure had actually originated, which was not where a natural failure would have originated in a system of that design. "Not very," he said. She nodded once, the same kind of nod Gerald had given her, efficient and without drama. A decision being made and registered. "I need to make some calls," she said. "I know." She stood up, then stopped. She looked at Maddie still sleeping on the couch. She had woken briefly at 6, eaten half a granola bar that Renata had produced from somewhere, and gone back to sleep with the boneless ease of a child whose body knew it was still owed rest. "She's a good kid," Audrey said. "Yeah," Logan said. "She is. She looks like you, around the eyes. That's what people say." "It's true." Audrey looked at him. "You should eat something. There's a place 2 blocks east. I know it sounds absurd at a moment like this, but Renata says it opens at 7, and the eggs are apparently not terrible, which is about all you can ask of eggs at 7 in the morning after a night like this one." She had already moved toward the door before he could respond, which he suspected was deliberate. Not rudeness, but the habit of someone who made offers and then gave the other person the dignity of deciding without being watched. Logan looked at Maddie. He thought about the equipment panel again. He thought about a name he'd heard for the first time around 3 in the morning, said with complete trust, with no hesitation, Preston Vale. He thought about the fact that whatever had been done in that equipment room had been done by someone with access, with knowledge of the system, and with a reason. And that reasons were always attached to something, and that something was almost always money. He reached over and pulled his shirt back up over Maddie's shoulder where it had slipped. Then he sat back and waited for her to wake up, the way he always had, the way he always would, quietly, without requiring anything in particular from the morning except that it continue to unfold and that both of them be in it. Outside, New York was already moving. The city didn't slow for emergencies. It absorbed them and kept going, which was both its worst quality and its most useful one. Logan watched the light change against the window and felt, underneath the tiredness and the smoke still faint in his skin and the unresolved problem sitting at the back of his mind, something else. Something smaller and less dramatic, and for that reason harder to name. He had walked into that building because the math was simple. He could, so he did. There was no heroism in simple math. But the conversation at 3 in the morning had been something else. He wasn't certain what to do with that yet. So he did what he always did with things he wasn't certain about. He set it aside, in the same drawer as the equipment panel and the name Preston Vale, and the look on Audrey Carrington's face when she'd said some limitations cannot be managed, and he let Maddie sleep, and he waited for whatever the morning was actually going to require of him. It was going to require more than he expected. It almost always did. Maddie woke up at 8:17 asking for pancakes, which Logan considered a strong sign that the universe had not entirely lost its sense of proportion. She sat up on the family room couch with his t-shirt still around her shoulders and looked at the unfamiliar ceiling with the particular orientation process of a child rebuilding the previous night from available evidence. The hospital smell. The monitoring sounds from the adjacent corridor, her father sitting in the chair beside her with dark circles under his eyes, and the sleeves of his undershirt pushed to the elbows. "Sophie," she said, not a question. "She's okay. Sleeping." Maddie nodded slowly and pulled the shirt tighter. "You went into the fire." "The smoke, it wasn't fully on fire." "Dad." "There was some fire. Not where I was." Maddie looked at him with the expression she had inherited from no one he could identify. A specific kind of 8-year-old judgment that landed harder than most adult versions because it was entirely without political calculation. "You could have gotten hurt." "I was careful." "You always say that." "It's always been true so far." She considered this with the reluctant fairness of someone who couldn't argue the point, but wasn't satisfied with it either. Then she slid off the couch and padded to the window in her sock feet and looked out at the hospital's interior garden, which in the morning light turned out to have a small fountain and 3 pigeons engaged in an ongoing territorial dispute near the base of it. "Can we get pancakes?" "Renata said there's a place 2 blocks east." "Who's Renata?" "She works for Sophie's mom." "The lady who told security to kick us out?" Logan was quiet for a moment. "Yes." Maddie watched the pigeons. "She said sorry?" "She did." "Was it a real sorry or a because she had to sorry?" He thought about the family room at 3 in the morning and the particular quality of Audrey's voice when she'd said I need to say it correctly. The way it had cost her something, which was how he'd known she meant it. Real, he said. Maddie turned from the window. Okay, she said, with the simple finality of a child filing a piece of information and moving on. Pancakes. What? They found the place 2 blocks east. It was a narrow diner with a counter along the left wall and 6 booths along the right, the kind of place that had been operating since before the neighborhood around it changed, and had chosen not to change with it. The eggs were, as Renata had promised, not terrible. The pancakes were significantly better than not terrible. Maddie ate with the dedicated focus of someone replacing a caloric deficit, and Logan drank coffee and stared at the table and thought about Preston Vale. He had looked up the name on his phone while Maddie slept. Vale Capital Partners, based in Midtown. 22 years in operation. Residential and commercial development, medical facility investment, public-private partnership consulting. 11 major projects in the New York metro area in the past decade, 6 of them in joint venture with Carrington Development. The Hartwell Children's Rehabilitation Center was the most recent, the largest, and the one closest to completion. The firm's website had professional photographs and a biography that described Preston Vale as a 20-year industry leader with a commitment to community-focused development. The photograph showed a man in his mid-50s, silver-haired, with the kind of face that conveyed competence without warmth. The face of someone who had learned that appearing trustworthy was more useful than actually being comfortable in a room. Logan had seen that face in many configurations. In briefings, in after-action reviews, in the particular type of person who managed risk from a safe distance and called it strategy. He put his phone away and watched Maddie eat her pancakes. "What are you thinking about?" she asked without looking up. "Nothing important. Your face does a thing when you're thinking about something important." "What thing?" She made a gesture with her fork, a small tightening motion near her own jaw. "That thing, where you're pretending to be relaxed." Logan picked up his coffee. "When did you get so observant?" "I've always been observant. You just don't notice because you're too busy pretending to be relaxed." He looked at his 8-year-old daughter for a moment with something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite pride, but was in the neighborhood of both. "Finish your pancakes." "I'm finishing them," she said. "I can observe and eat at the same time. I have 2 skills." Gerald called at 9:45. Logan was back at the hospital, Maddie beside him in the hallway outside Sophie's room, when his phone buzzed with an unknown number that turned out to be Audrey's security director calling from a different line. Because, Gerald explained without being asked, he had reason to believe his primary phone might have been compromised in the past 48 hours, and he was taking precautions. That detail alone told Logan several things. "The procurement records came in an hour ago," Gerald said. "Audrey wanted you to hear this directly." There was a pause that had weight in it. The electrical systems in the rehabilitation center, materials, wiring, panel components, were specified at Grade A industrial standard in the project contract. What was actually installed was Grade C commercial. The difference in cost per unit is approximately 60%. Logan waited. "Across a building this size," Gerald continued, "the substitution represents a savings of approximately $4.3 million. The invoices submitted to Carrington Development for reimbursement were for the Grade A materials. The Grade C materials were sourced through a subsidiary purchasing company registered in Delaware, majority owned by a holding company that our attorney found this morning connects, through 2 intermediary entities, to Preston Vale personally." The hallway was quiet. Down the corridor, a cart wheeled past. Logan watched it go. "He billed Carrington for premium materials and pocketed the difference," Logan said. "That's the preliminary conclusion. The full picture is more extensive. This pattern appears in at least 3 prior projects. Total exposure preliminary estimate is somewhere between $18 and $26 million over 4 years. And the inspection that cleared the electrical work 4 months ago? The inspector who signed off has a consulting contract with a firm that shares an address with one of Vale's subsidiaries." Gerald's voice was even, professional, but had a quality underneath it that Logan recognized as controlled anger. "The upcoming city inspection, the one that would have flagged the materials before the building opened, is scheduled for 3 weeks from now. And the fire," Logan said, "gave him a reason to access and destroy the evidence before that inspection happened." "That's what Audrey believes," Gerald said, "and I agree with her." What does your attorney say? That we have enough for a regulatory referral, but not yet enough for a criminal filing. We need the original source documents from the materials procurement chain. Digital copies are insufficient because Vail's attorneys will argue alteration. We need the physical records from the project management office. Where are those? The Vail Capital Site Management Office is located in the unfinished section of the Rehabilitation Center. 3rd floor, East Wing. They've had a document management station there since construction began. Physical files, hardware with local storage, the works. Gerald paused. Audrey has already contacted the DA's office. They are interested but require more time to build the independent case. In the meantime, she's concerned that if Vail is aware the evidence trail is being followed, he'll move to destroy it, Logan said, or move it, or both. Has he been notified that Audrey is investigating? He sent flowers to the hospital this morning, Gerald said, with a card expressing concern about Sophie. Audrey's read on that is that he's covering baseline, maintaining the appearance of the trusted partner while he figures out what we know. Logan looked at Sophie's door. Through the small glass panel, he could see that Sophie was awake now, sitting up in bed, and Maddie had somehow ended up in the room. He wasn't entirely certain when that had happened. And the two of them were conducting what appeared to be a serious conversation about something. Sophie looked animated. Given that 20 hours ago she had been unconscious in a smoke-filled equipment room, the site had a specific quality that Logan did not attempt to name. "Tell Audrey I'll call her in an hour," he said. "I need to look at the rehabilitation center's building plans first." "She anticipated that," Gerald said. "She's having them sent to your phone in the next 20 minutes. "Of course she is," Logan said, and ended the call. Sophie Carrington met him at 11 o'clock. When a nurse opened the room door and Sophie looked past Maddie and said, "Are you Logan Barrett?" with the directness of a child who had been waiting for this introduction and intended to get it right. "Yeah," he said. "Maddie said you were in the smoke. She said you carried me." "That's right." Sophie considered him with a 9-year-old's frank, undefended assessment. She had Audrey's eyes. Not the color, but the quality of them. The looking for information quality. The head bandage was white and neat, and she was wearing a hospital gown over her blue dress because she had refused to take the dress off, which Maddie had already told him, and which he now understood was entirely consistent with what he was seeing. "Were you scared?" Sophie asked. "A little," he said. Which was true. The specific fear of finding a child, and then the additional fear of the fire spreading faster than calculated, and the compounded fear of the smoke thickening past the point of manageable. All of it had been present. All of it had been noted and filed and not acted upon, because that was how it worked. You were scared, and you kept moving. That was the only discipline that mattered. Sophie seemed to appreciate the honesty. "I don't remember the smoke," she said. "I remember going down the hallway with Nadia, and then I remember waking up here and Mom was holding my hand and crying, but pretending she wasn't. She was pretty worried about you. She doesn't like to cry in front of people. She thinks it makes her look weak." Sophie said this with the uncomplicated matter-of-factness of a child reporting an observed phenomenon. "I think it makes her look like a person, but she's working on it." Logan said nothing, but he stored this information with the careful attention he gave to things that came from unexpected and usually accurate sources. Maddie, who was sitting cross-legged on the end of Sophie's bed in an arrangement that suggested she had been there long enough to have fully settled in, said, "Sophie's teaching me to play the first part of a piano song, just on her knee. Her fingers are really fast." "Muscle memory," Sophie said with some authority. "You don't have to think about it. It's like how your dad knows how to do things in smoke without being able to see. His hands know." Logan looked at his daughter. Maddie shrugged. "I told her some stuff." "How much stuff?" "She told me about the Navy," Sophie said. "That you were a medic. That you knew how to fix people in bad places." She looked at him with a curiosity that was not intrusive but was very thorough. "Why did you stop?" Logan sat down in the chair beside the bed. "Because I had a better job." Sophie looked at Maddie, then back at him, with the expression of a child who understood exactly what he meant and was deciding whether it was sufficient to her. Apparently it was, because she moved on without further interrogation. "Mom said you work at a building." "I manage building maintenance, yes." "That's a big change." "Big changes are sometimes the point." Sophie absorbed this. Then, "She also said she told security to make you leave, before." "She did." Are you still mad? I wasn't mad, he said, which was also true. He had not been mad. He had made a calculation about the cost of the confrontation versus the cost of simply leaving, and the cost of the confrontation had seemed higher, and so he had left, and then the building had exploded and the calculation had become irrelevant. She told me she was wrong, Sophie said. She tells me when she's wrong. She doesn't always do it right away, but she does it. Another pause. She told me you wouldn't let her pay you back. She doesn't owe me. She thinks she does. That's her business. Sophie tilted her head. It was such a specific Audrey gesture that Logan was momentarily struck by it. Maddie says you're stubborn. Maddie's very perceptive. I'm right here, Maddie said. I know, Logan said. I was agreeing with you. Audrey found him in the hospital's small interior garden at noon. He was sitting on a concrete bench near the fountain. The pigeons from that morning had relocated. New ones had arrived and established similar territorial arrangements, and he had the rehabilitation center's building plans open on his phone, cross-referencing them with the fire investigator's preliminary diagram that Gerald had forwarded 40 minutes earlier. She sat down beside him without preamble. She was wearing different clothes from last night. Renata had evidently made a supply run, and she looked like someone who had slept for 2 hours and refused to let that be visible, which meant it was moderately visible to anyone paying attention. Gerald briefed you, she said, this morning. And? He turned the phone so she could see the diagram he'd been building in his head, the floor plans overlaid with the investigator's fire origin map, the ventilation corridors, the location of the project management office on the 3rd floor east wing. The document station is here, he pointed. The building has been closed since the incident, but it's still accessible through the construction entrance on the south side. Security seal, but it's a construction site seal, not a police seal. The official investigation hasn't designated the 3rd floor east wing as part of the fire zone because the fire didn't reach it. Which means Vale can access it, Audrey said. If he has a site credential and moves before the DA's team gets a warrant, yes. He looked at her directly. How long does your attorney think the warrant process takes? Best case, 48 hours. More realistically, 4 to 5 days. The DA is building from the financial record side first, because those are cleaner for a criminal referral. 4 to 5 days is enough time for Vale to move everything. He put the phone down. Does he know the financial trail has been pulled? Audrey was quiet for a moment. I spoke with him this morning, briefly. I didn't indicate anything specific, but Preston has known me for 6 years. He is... She stopped, reorganized. He's not unintelligent. He'll know something is wrong by the texture of the conversation, even if the content is normal. She looked at the fountain. He sent Sophie flowers. Gerald told me. White roses, she said, with a flatness that conveyed everything without requiring elaboration. Very elegant. Card said he was devastated to hear about the accident and wished her a full recovery. She said the word accident like it had a taste she didn't like. 15 years. I've known him 15 years. 6 years of formal partnership. She exhaled slowly. 6 years of my name attached to his projects, his materials, his contractors, his inspectors. She looked at him. If the substitution pattern goes back 4 years across 3 projects, that means families have been living in and using facilities that were built to a standard that could not pass a proper inspection. Children's facilities. Her voice stayed level, but underneath it was something that was not sadness exactly. It was the colder variety of feeling, the kind that came from being used by someone you had chosen to trust. Logan understood that feeling from different contexts. The architecture of betrayal was the same regardless of the setting. We need to preserve whatever's in that office before he can move it, he said. My attorney says touching the evidence before the warrant is issued creates chain of custody problems. I'm not talking about taking it. I'm talking about knowing what's there and being able to direct investigators to it, in a way that ensures it's still there when they arrive. He looked at the building plans again. The project management station on the 3rd floor east wing. Does it have a network connection to Carrington Development servers, or is it locally isolated? Audrey thought. The Vale Group insisted on a separate network partition. They said it was standard practice for their firm's proprietary procurement data. She paused. Which now has an obvious explanation. But the building itself, environmental systems, security cameras, access logs, those run on the general building management network? Yes, Standard integration. Carrington manages the building infrastructure systems. So you have legitimate access to the building's own systems. Access logs, camera feeds, environmental monitors. Yes. She was following him now. He could see it. If someone enters the third floor east wing, I'd see it through the building system. More than that, he said. If the building management system records activity in that section, door access, terminal usage, environmental changes, those records are yours. Legitimately. They don't require a warrant because you're not accessing Vale's partition network. You're reading your own building's infrastructure logs. Audrey looked at him with an expression that had several layers to it. The top layer was assessment. Underneath that was something that might have been reluctant admiration. And underneath that was a decision being finalized. If Vale's people access that office and touch those files, she said slowly, and our building system records the access and the environmental activity in the room, timestamps, terminal interactions logged through the room's power management system. It's not evidence of what's in the documents, Logan said, but it's evidence of activity. It corroborates the DA's financial trail with a physical event timeline. He paused. And if the activity happens at an unusual hour before the warrant is served, that pattern itself is significant. She nodded once, twice, the kind of nodding that meant a mind working through implications rather than acknowledging a point. Then she took out her phone and called Gerald. The conversation was short. Gerald asked 3 clarifying questions, each one more technical than the last, each one answered by Audrey relaying Logan's input, which Gerald then incorporated without comment, because Gerald was a professional who cared about outcomes rather than the organizational chart of who was advising whom. When she ended the call, she looked at Logan with the expression he was beginning to recognize as her version of gratitude. It wasn't warm, exactly, but it was very direct. Gerald is activating the building's monitoring system. If Vale or anyone connected to him enters that section, we'll have a record within 60 seconds. Good. This was your idea. It was your building, he said. I just read the plans. She looked at him for a moment that was slightly longer than strictly necessary. You keep doing that. Doing what? Distributing credit to other people for things you initiated. Credit doesn't matter. Outcomes matter. That's a very specific philosophy. It's just how I think about it. She looked at the fountain. The new pigeons had reached some accommodation, apparently. They were feeding from the same patch of ground without confrontation. Gerald also told me what he found this morning about your service record, she said. He gave me a summary. Logan didn't respond to this immediately. I didn't ask him to initially, she said. After the hospital, after what I saw, I needed to understand who you are. Because what you did isn't something a person just does. You don't carry a child out of a burning building and read an electrical panel and identify a conspiracy in the same evening through luck or instinct. That's built. That takes years. She looked at him. So he told me. What did he tell you? 12-year SEAL service, 8 deployments, combat medicine certification, several operations that are still classified, which Gerald noted with a specific expression that I understood to mean they were significant. She paused. And that you left 18 months after your wife died when Maddie was 3. The garden was quiet except for the fountain. I left when my service obligation completed, Logan said. 18 months was coincidental. Was it? He thought about the question as he'd been asked it rather than the version he usually answered. No, he said. It wasn't coincidental. I completed the obligation because walking away from a commitment wasn't something I could do, but I was done before that. When Maddie was with her aunt for those 6 weeks, when I came home and she looked at me like she was trying to remember if she was supposed to know me, he stopped. I was done. Audrey listened to this without filling the space around it, which he appreciated. The work you do now, she said, the building maintenance, does it? She seemed to be choosing words with some care, which was not her default mode. Does it feel like enough? After everything you... Yes, he said, flat and simple and completely true. I'm home every night. I know where Maddie is. I can fix things that are broken and prevent things from breaking, which is more useful than people give it credit for being. He looked at his phone, at the building plans still on the screen. The work is honest, it has value, and it doesn't cost anything I'm not willing to spend. She absorbed this. What did it cost before? He looked at her. I'm sorry, she said. That's too... Everything, he said. It cost everything. And it was worth it. and I'd make the same choices again, and I also can't make those choices anymore. Both things are true at the same time. She didn't try to resolve that. She just let it sit, which was the correct response, and he found himself thinking that she was better at listening than she probably got credit for, because she projected such a specific kind of forward-moving competence that people likely spent most of their time with her responding rather than speaking. "You're wondering," he said, "whether to trust my read on the Vale situation or whether I'm projecting something from a different context onto a financial fraud case." She blinked. Then, with a small exhale, "Yes, that's exactly what I was wondering." "The read is clean," he said. "It's not personal. The electrical panel configuration isn't something I'm interpreting through a military lens. It's a physical fact that says a specific thing regardless of who's reading it. The financial pattern Gerald described is consistent with what the physical evidence suggests. Vale built a system to produce an event that looked like an accident and was designed to occur at a moment when destruction of evidence would be attributed to the emergency response." He met her eyes. "The sophistication of it tells you something. This wasn't improvised. The 4-year materials substitution means the financial fraud preceded the cover-up plan, but the cover-up was part of the design from early on." "He planned for the inspection," she said. "He knew eventually someone would look at the materials, and he built a contingency." "Yes." "He didn't plan for someone to survive the fire and read the panel configuration. He planned for there not to be a fire investigator able to access the East Wing before the evidence was moved," Logan said. "The fire was supposed to be contained and investigated quickly as an equipment failure, at which point the real evidence was already elsewhere. What he didn't plan for," he paused, "was that the fire spread faster than he'd calculated, which means either the suppression system failed more comprehensively than intended, or someone in his operation made an error in the setup." "If it spread faster than planned," Audrey said slowly, "Sophie's being in that corridor was not part of— No, that was exactly what he didn't want. A child trapped, a public emergency, investigators on scene before the site could be quietly accessed." Logan shook his head. "He's managing the aftermath now, sending flowers, maintaining the relationship, calculating how much you know and how fast he can move." Audrey was very still. "My name is on those buildings," she said quietly. "The families who live in those residential developments, the patients at the medical facilities, the children who are going to use that rehabilitation center." She looked at the fountain. "My name means they're safe. That's what the Carrington name is supposed to mean. He used that." Logan didn't offer comfort. She wasn't asking for it. She was processing something that required being stated rather than resolved. "What do you need from me?" he asked. She looked at him with the directness that he'd come to understand was her most natural mode when she wasn't performing the executive function. "I need someone who can read that building the way you read the Hartwell. Someone who knows what to look for and how to document what they find without contaminating evidence." She paused. "And someone Vale won't recognize as a threat until it's too late for that recognition to matter." "A building maintenance supervisor who happens to be visiting the construction site," Logan said. "You still have the Veterans Program invitation," she said. "The rehabilitation center is the project that invitation supported. Visiting the site would be entirely consistent. That's a stretch. You have a better one?" He didn't. "There's one more thing," Audrey said. "Gerald found something in the building access records this morning. Dwyer, the Vale Group's site coordinator, badged into the rehabilitation center's third-floor East Wing at 11:45 last night." She paused. 4 hours after the fire at the Hartwell." Logan looked at her. "He was there for 37 minutes, she said. "And the building's power management log shows a workstation terminal in the project office was active for 31 of those 37 minutes. He started moving files last night," Logan said, "or copying them to remove originals, or uploading to a location outside the building's network." She stood up. "Which means we have significantly less time than my attorney's estimate of 4 to 5 days. She looked at him steadily. "I need to know what's still in that office. Today." Logan looked at the building plans on his phone. He thought about Maddie upstairs eating a second round of something from the hospital cafeteria under Renata's supervision, which had been arranged 20 minutes ago for reasons that now seemed more purposeful than coincidental, because Audrey Carrington did not do things without a sequence in mind. He thought about Preston Vale sending white roses to a 9-year-old girl he had almost killed. He thought about the families in those buildings, The children who were going to walk through the rehabilitation center doors on opening day and trust that the ceiling above them was what it was supposed to be. I need the current site badge protocol, he said, and the maintenance request logs for the third floor east wing, any open tickets, anything that would give legitimate reason for a site inspection. Audrey had her phone out before he finished the sentence. There's an open HVAC calibration ticket on the third floor east wing, she said, logged 3 weeks ago. Nobody has addressed it yet because of the final push toward the opening. She looked up. It's in your department's portfolio. Then I have a reason to be there, he said. Yes, she said. You do. He stood up and put his phone in his pocket. The pigeons scattered from the fountain base at the movement and then settled again 3 feet away, indifferent and persistent. I'll need Gerald to walk me through the building's camera blind spots before I go, he said. And I'll need to know Vale's schedule today. Gerald's working on it. Of course he is. He started toward the hospital entrance. Audrey fell into step beside him, not because she was following him, but because they were both going to the same place, which was a different thing. One more thing, she said. When this is over, when the evidence is secured and the DA has what they need, I want you to know that I intend to rebuild every compromised section of every building Vale touched. Materials, labor, inspection, the whole chain, regardless of cost. She said it with the flat certainty of a decision already made. I know you think the credit should be distributed and the outcomes are what matter, but I need you to know that I understand what my name is for. And I'm going to make it mean what it's supposed to mean. Logan walked 2 more steps before responding. I know, he said. You can't know. I haven't done it yet. You just described it like it was already done, he said. You don't talk about things you're not going to do. She was quiet for a moment. No, she said. I don't. They went inside. The rehabilitation center was 3 miles east in a building that held $18 million of documented fraud, a 37-minute access log from the previous night, and whatever Preston Vale had not yet managed to move or destroy. Logan had walked into smoke once already this week on the mathematics of being able to, and therefore doing it. The mathematics had not changed. The rehabilitation center sat at the end of Kellner Street, like something between a promise and an apology. 9 stories of glass and poured concrete in a neighborhood that had spent 30 years waiting for exactly this kind of investment and had gotten it, and now had to reckon with what the investment had actually been built from. Logan arrived at 1:15 in the afternoon in a vehicle Gerald had arranged, a white utility van with a building services logo on the side, the kind of vehicle that appeared on construction sites every day and generated no particular interest from anyone. Gerald rode with him. Neither of them talked much on the way over. Gerald was a man who understood the value of silence before an operation, which told Logan something additional about Gerald's professional history that Gerald had not volunteered and Logan did not ask about. The site badge Gerald had provided cleared the south entrance without incident. The construction crew on the lower floors, finish work on the lobby, primarily, registered their arrival with the standard indifference of workers who saw supervisory visits as a mild interruption at best. Logan signed in at the site management desk near the entrance, listed the third floor east wing HVAC calibration on the maintenance log, and took the stairs. Gerald stayed at the entrance level, monitoring the building access system from his phone. Logan went up alone. The third floor east wing was unfinished in the way that end-of-project spaces were unfinished, not raw construction, but the particular state of incompleteness that preceded final inspection, where 90% of the visible work was done and the remaining 10% was the hardest 10. Ceiling panels not yet installed in 2 sections, electrical covers missing on 3 wall conduits. The smell of fresh paint and concrete sealer, and, underneath both, the older smell of a building that had been closed up through a winter. The project management office was at the end of the east corridor, behind a fire door with a standard construction lock. The lock had not been upgraded when the building went into its pre-opening phase, which was either an oversight or the result of someone deciding that a deadbolt and a construction site badge system were sufficient security for an office that wasn't supposed to contain anything of particular value. Logan stood outside the door for a moment. He wasn't going inside. He was not touching the lock, not entering the space, not doing anything that a building maintenance supervisor conducting an HVAC inspection had not been explicitly authorized to do. He was standing in the corridor, which was his corridor to be in, and observing what could be observed from the corridor. The gap beneath the fire door was wide enough that he could see the floor just inside, bare concrete, and on it, the rectangular impression left by something heavy that had recently been moved. A filing cabinet or a storage crate. The impression was fresh. The concrete dust around it had not settled back to level. Whatever had been there was gone. He crouched, looked at the gap more carefully. At the far end of the visible floor, near what would be the base of the workstation desk, there were 2 USB drives. Small ones, the cheap kind that came in bulk. They had fallen or been knocked behind the desk leg and not been retrieved. The kind of small thing you missed when you were moving fast. He straightened up. He took out his phone and photographed the door, the floor gap, the dust impression, the fallen drives, all from his position in the corridor. He photographed the corridor itself, the access panel to the HVAC return duct that was the official reason for his presence, the conduit covers on the wall, the ceiling tile arrangement, the fire door and its frame. He documented it the way he had documented 100 things in 100 places. Not for drama, not with any feeling about it, just completely and accurately. Then he walked to the HVAC access panel 12 feet down the corridor, opened it, took 3 calibration readings with the meter Gerald had included in the maintenance kit, logged them in the site maintenance system through the app on his phone, and closed the panel. His phone buzzed. Gerald. Vale's car just pulled into the site parking lot. He's not alone. 2 men with him I don't recognize. They're heading for the south entrance. Logan looked at the time. 1:43. He typed back. How long to clear the south entrance check-in? Gerald. 3 minutes if they sign the log. Less if they skip it. Vale has a site credential that bypasses the standard desk check-in. Logan looked at the stairwell door at the end of the corridor. Then at the fire door with the project management office behind it. Then at the elevator bank in the middle of the wing, which was operational but slow. He had noted the response time coming up, approximately 45 seconds per floor. He had 2 options and roughly 90 seconds to decide between them. He could take the stairwell down and exit through the construction access on the north side before Vale reached the 3rd floor. Clean exit, no contact, no confrontation. The photographs were on his phone and back to the cloud through the building's network, which was Carrington's network, which meant Audrey's team had them already. Mission accomplished by any measurable metric. Or he could stay exactly where he was, in a corridor he had legitimate authorization to be in, conducting an inspection he had a work order for, and let Preston Vale find him there. He thought about the USB drives on the floor behind the desk. Small, cheap, forgotten in haste. Whatever was on them was almost certainly a copy of what had been on the workstation terminal. Procurement records, materials invoices, supplier contacts, the paper trail of 4 years of deliberate fraud. Dwyer had been there last night for 37 minutes, copying and moving files. He had missed those drives because he had been moving fast, and it was dark, and small things fell behind desk legs every day in every office in the world. If Vale came up here today, he would find them eventually, and then they would be gone. Logan looked at the project office door for another 3 seconds. Then he made a decision that was not entirely strategic and not entirely sensible, but was consistent with a principle he had carried since before he could have articulated what principles were. You didn't leave things behind that needed to come with you. He called Gerald. Vale's people can't enter that office, he said without preamble. There's physical evidence on the floor behind the workstation desk. 2 USB drives. Dwyer missed them last night. A very brief pause. You're still on the 3rd floor. HVAC calibration takes as long as it takes. Logan. Gerald's voice had a quality in it, not alarm, but the sharpened attention of a professional assessing risk. Vale is a man who set a fire in a building with 200 people in it to cover a financial crime. He is not, I know what he is, Logan said. I need you to call Audrey right now and get her attorney on the phone. I need a legal basis for securing those drives as part of Carrington Development's building infrastructure documentation. The building's network is Audrey's. The building's records are Audrey's. Those drives were found in a corridor of her building during a maintenance inspection. He paused. Is there a legal argument? Another pause. Longer this time. Gerald was not a lawyer, but Gerald had spent 11 years working for someone who required her security director to understand the edges of legal authority in the same way that she understood them herself. Precisely, and without romanticism about where the edges were. The office space is leased to the Vale Group for the duration of the project, Gerald said. The corridor is Carrington property. The drives were found in the corridor. Were they? The longest pause yet. Building maintenance documented their location during an HVAC inspection, Gerald said. Yes, I believe that's accurate. Get the attorney on the phone, fast. He ended the call. He put on the latex gloves from the maintenance kit, standard equipment used for handling electrical components and HVAC filter elements, completely unremarkable on a maintenance worker, and went back to the project office door. He was not opening the door. He was not entering the space. I was crouching at the corridor side of the threshold, and through the gap beneath the door, using the thin flashlight from the maintenance kit to confirm the location of the items he had photographed. And then, because the door had a 2-centimeter undercut, standard for fire door airflow compliance, and the drives were resting against the base of a desk leg that was less than 8 inches from the door, from the electrical kit to reach beneath the door and guide the drives toward the gap until they were on the corridor side of the threshold. It took 4 minutes and 40 seconds. His hands were steady. They were always steady when it mattered. He was standing up, the drives in a labeled evidence bag from the kit, when he heard the elevator. Preston Vale was smaller in person than his website photograph suggested. This was not unusual. Photographs of powerful people frequently inflated an impression of physical presence that the actual person didn't quite sustain. He was perhaps 5'10", the silver hair thinner than the professional headshot implied, with the particular posture of someone who had spent decades in rooms where being relaxed was a competitive advantage. He wore a dark coat over a suit that cost considerably more than Logan's had, which was not a difficult benchmark to clear. The 2 men with him were not assistants. Logan clocked this in the first second, the way they moved, the way they arranged themselves relative to Vale when they stepped off the elevator, the absence of phones or folders in their hands. They were there to be present in a particular way, which was a different job than administrative support. Vale saw Logan immediately. He also saw the maintenance kit, the HVAC panel, still open at the end of the corridor. The work order on Logan's phone, visible on the screen because Logan had deliberately left it visible. This floor's supposed to be restricted, Vale said. His voice was the kind of controlled that came from practice rather than temperament. Not naturally calm, but professionally so. Who authorized a maintenance team up here? Open work order, Logan said. HVAC calibration, East Wing, 3rd floor. Been in the system 3 weeks. He held up the phone. Carrington Building Management. I can give you the ticket number if you need it. Vale looked at him, really looked, in the way of someone running a quick assessment and not especially trying to hide that he was doing it. I haven't seen you on this site before. I mostly work the residential properties, Logan said. They pulled me over for this one because the regular tech is out with a back issue. He said it easily because it was easy. He had spoken in the flat, unremarkable register of someone doing a job in 200 different rooms in 2 different countries, and the register was not something he had to manufacture. Vale's eyes moved to the maintenance kit, to Logan's gloved hands, to the small labeled bag clipped to the outside of the kit that contained 2 USB drives and was not, from the outside, identifiable as anything other than another piece of equipment. What's in the bag? Vale asked. Electrical contacts and a capacitor set, Logan said. The HVAC controller on this floor's been throwing a calibration error because of a faulty contact in the return duct. Standard fix. He zipped the kit closed. All done up here. You need me to sign anything on the way out? Vale was still looking at him, not with hostility, with the specific quality of attention that Logan associated with people who were very good at identifying discrepancies. The 2 men on either side of him had not moved. Your name, Vale said. Barrett. Logan Barrett. Something shifted in Vale's face. Small, fast, the kind of change that only registered if you were watching for it. And Logan was watching for it because he had been watching for exactly that since the elevator opened. Preston Vale knew who Logan Barrett was. He had known since at least last night, possibly since the Hartwell, because a man who ran a sophisticated 4-year financial fraud and engineered a building fire to cover it did not spend the subsequent 18 hours sending flowers and maintaining appearances without first learning everything available about the person who had walked out of his burning building carrying evidence that the fire had not been an accident. The 2 men were still arranged in the same positions, but something in their arrangement had tightened. Logan's phone rang. He looked at the screen, Audrey's number. "I need to take this," he said to Vale, with the mild apologetic tone of someone who found the interruption inconvenient rather than useful. He stepped away and answered. "Tell me you're out of that building," Audrey said. Her voice was at a controlled pitch, but the control was working harder than it had been this morning. "Working on it," he said quietly. "Your partner is here." A brief silence. "Gerald told me. The attorney says the drives are documentable as found objects in a Carrington corridor during an authorized maintenance inspection. She's filing a preservation order right now. It'll be executed in approximately 40 minutes, which means investigators arrive in 40 minutes. Another brief silence. "Logan." There are two men with Vale who are not site personnel. Gerald ran their car registration. They work for a private security contractor that Vale has used before on situations. "I understand," he said. "Can you get out?" He looked down the corridor. Vale and the two men were between him and the elevator. The stairwell was behind him, 40 feet in the other direction, and would take him down to the north construction exit. "Yes," he said. "The building's cameras are recording," she said. "Everything on the third floor is live. Gerald has it on his screen, and the feed is being simultaneously copied to a secure server. Whatever happens in that corridor in the next 40 minutes is documented." "Good," Logan said. "Tell Gerald to make sure he catches the elevator interaction on the southeast camera. The angle should cover the full corridor." He ended the call. He turned back to Vale. "Sorry about that," he said. "Building management." Vale had taken 2 steps toward him. The two men had not moved, but the arrangement had adjusted in a way that was not accidental. They were no longer standing beside Vale. They were standing on either side of the corridor width. "You found something in that hallway," Vale said. Not a question. "HVAC contacts," Logan said. "Like I said." "Barrett." Vale said the name with a deliberateness that confirmed he had known it before Logan said it. "I know who you are. You were at the Hartwell last night. You were in the building during the incident." He paused. "You spoke with Audrey this morning." "Mrs. Carrington's daughter was hospitalized," Logan said. "Naturally, she's spoken with a number of people." "You're not a number of people," Vale said. "You're a specific person who was in a specific part of the building last night and who is now in a specific part of this building today." He stopped approximately 8 feet from Logan. "That's a coincidence I find difficult to accept." Logan looked at him steadily. "I'm a building maintenance supervisor running an open work order. If you have a concern about the scheduling, you can contact building management and they'll explain the ticket history." "What was in the equipment room?" Vale said. "The junction panel. Did you touch it?" "I was extracting an unconscious child from the adjacent corridor," Logan said. "I wasn't conducting a panel inspection." "But you saw it." "I saw a lot of things. It was a difficult evening." Vale looked at him for a long moment. The two men had not moved, but their stillness had a different quality now. The quality of something waiting for a signal. "You're very calm," Vale said. "I find that helps in difficult situations. Most people would be nervous right now." "I'm aware of how this looks," Logan said. "Two men I don't know standing between me and the elevator. A conversation that isn't really about HVAC calibration. I understand the intention." He kept his voice at the same register. "I want to be clear about something. Everything in this corridor right now is being recorded on the building's camera system, which is Carrington's system, and that feed is being monitored live off-site. Every word of this conversation, everyone's position in this corridor, is documented and secured on a remote server." He paused. "That's not a threat. It's a fact. I'm giving it to you as information because I think accurate information is useful to you right now." Vale's expression was very controlled, but underneath it something had shifted. The calculation behind his eyes was running at speed. "What do you want?" Vale said. "I'm going to finish my shift," Logan said. "I'm going to sign out at the site desk downstairs, return the vehicle, and write up my inspection notes. That's all I want to do this afternoon." "And the bag on your kit?" "Electrical components," Logan said, "documented in the inspection log." They looked at each other. 8 feet of corridor between them, 2 men arranged on either side. A building camera overhead that Vale could now calculate was recording every second of this. Vale made his calculation. Logan could see him make it. The rapid assessment of what Logan had, what Logan could prove, what the camera had captured, what moving against him in this corridor would cost relative to what it would gain. Vale was not a man who acted without calculating costs. It was, in a way, the defining fact about him. He stepped back. The two men moved with him. "Have a good afternoon, Mr. Barrett," Vale said. His voice was entirely recovered. Smooth, professional, the kind of voice that belonged in a boardroom and had spent considerable time there. "My apologies for the misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Logan said. "Have a good afternoon." He walked down the corridor, past the elevator, past the two men, both of whom he passed within 4 feet of, and neither of whom he looked at directly, because looking directly at them would communicate that he considered them a threat, and communicating that would be inaccurate. He did not consider them a threat in the way Vale intended them to be a threat. He had assessed both of them in the first 15 seconds after they stepped off the elevator. Their builds, their positions, their reaction timing when Logan had moved to take his phone call, and he had determined that they were intimidation rather than capability, which was a meaningful distinction. He pushed through the stairwell door. "I went down 4 flights in the dark. The stairwell lights were on a motion trigger system that hadn't been calibrated yet. Without hurrying, without looking back, counting steps by habit, and emerging through the north construction exit into the cold afternoon air. He stood outside for exactly 10 seconds, breathing the November air, before his phone buzzed with a message from Gerald. "They're still on the 3. Haven't moved. Camera has everything." He typed back, "Good. I'm at the north exit." Then he walked to the far end of the construction perimeter, away from the sight line of the south parking lot where Vale's car was parked, and he leaned against the temporary fencing and felt, for the first time since the elevator opened on the 3rd floor, the actual weight of the previous 90 minutes. Not fear. He had not been afraid. But adrenaline did not require fear. It was a chemical response to threat assessment, and the threat assessment had been genuine even if the fear had not been. His hands were still steady. They were always steady. But his jaw ached slightly, which meant he had been holding his back teeth together, which he only did when the situation required him to be absolutely still in a way that cost something. He exhaled. He called Audrey. She answered on the first ring. "Are you out?" she said. "I'm out." A silence that had a specific quality of relief in it. "Gerald has the full corridor on camera. Vale and his people are still in the building. Our attorney is executing the preservation order in," a pause, "22 minutes. The drives are in the maintenance kit," Logan said, "documented as found objects in the corridor during the inspection. Your attorney needs to know the exact language of the inspection log entry. Gerald will connect you with her." "Logan." She stopped. Started again. "Vale knows who you are." "Yes." "He looked you up." Gerald confirmed. There was a search query on Logan Barrett from an IP associated with Vale Capital Partners at 6:30 this morning. "I know. He sent those men to the site today because of you." "I know that too. You went anyway." It wasn't quite a question. Logan looked at the building's north face, raw concrete and scaffolding and glass that looked like something solid from the outside, concealing materials that weren't what they were supposed to be. "The drives needed to be in the corridor," he said, "not in that office." She was quiet for a moment. "You could have been hurt." "I could have been." "But you calculated that you wouldn't be." "I calculated that the cost to Vale of moving against me on a live camera feed inside a building that your attorney was simultaneously filing a preservation order for was higher than the cost of letting me leave." He paused. "I was right." "What if you'd been wrong?" "Then Gerald would have had extremely good footage," Logan said. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite not a laugh. "That's not funny." "It's a little funny." "It is not." But the sound was still in her voice, fighting with the worry. "Come back to the hospital. Maddie's been asking where you are every 20 minutes. "What did Renata tell her?" "That you were handling something. Maddie said, and I'm quoting, 'That means he went somewhere dangerous and she doesn't want me to know.'" Logan closed his eyes briefly. "She's 8. "She's very 8, Audrey said. "Come back." Well, the preservation order was executed at 2:47 that afternoon. 4 investigators from the DA's office, accompanied by a Carrington attorney and 2 NYPD officers, entered the Kellner Street Rehabilitation Center and secured the 3rd floor East Wing Project Management Office. Vale and his associates had left the building at 2:15. They had found the project office locked and the USB drives not in it, which Logan knew because Gerald called him at 2:50 with a summary of the investigators' preliminary findings. Findings that included the dust impression on the floor, the operational log showing Dwyer's access the previous night, and the camera footage of the corridor conversation that had already been reviewed by the assistant DA on the case. The drives themselves were in the custody of Carrington's attorney, who had arranged their formal chain of custody documentation at 1:58, 49 minutes before the preservation order was executed. "The content?" Logan asked. "Still being processed," Gerald said. "Our attorney says early indication is consistent with what we expected: procurement records, supplier invoices, inspection certification documents. She said it looks like everything that was on the office workstation, copied to portable media." A pause. "She also said it's more than enough." Logan was sitting in the hospital corridor outside Sophie's room. Through the glass panel, Sophie was asleep, finally, one arm around Corporal, the stuffed dog that Renata had retrieved from the Hartwell that morning. Maddie was in the family room down the hall. Audrey was inside Sophie's room in the chair beside the bed, not asleep, not doing anything in particular, just sitting there with her daughter, which Logan had begun to understand was something Audrey didn't do enough of because she had convinced herself that doing was better than being. "What happens to Vale now?" Logan asked. "Our attorney and the DA's office are meeting tomorrow morning," Gerald said. "With the financial records from the morning and the physical documentation from the drives, the criminal referral is filing by end of week. Arrest is—" Gerald paused with the specific pause of a man who chose words with the care of someone who had learned the cost of imprecision. "Arrest is a question for the DA. But the regulatory side, the partnerships, the certifications, the licenses, those begin unraveling immediately." "The buildings," Logan said. "The families in the residential properties." "Audrey is convening the engineering team tomorrow. Full structural and materials assessment, every Carrington Vale joint project, starting with highest occupancy." Gerald's voice had the quality of a man reporting something he approved of. "She's already allocated the remediation budget. Whatever it costs." Logan looked through the glass at Sophie sleeping. "Good," he said. He ended the call and sat for a moment in the corridor's particular silence. Not a comfortable silence, but a substantial one, the kind that came after something had completed and before the next thing had begun. The next several weeks were already visible from where he sat. The investigation, the depositions, the engineering assessments, the remediation work on however many buildings had been compromised over 4 years of deliberate substitution. The families who would need to be notified, the repairs that would need to be made, the city inspectors who had signed off on work they hadn't properly reviewed and would now have to account for that. Vale's attorneys would make it slow and complicated and expensive, because that was what attorneys were for, and Vale would make it more complicated by being intelligent and by having spent 15 years building relationships with people who had reason to complicate it on his behalf. It would be difficult. It would be long. It would not be resolved in a tidy way at a predictable time, but the drives were in custody. The footage was secured. The money trail was documented. The physical evidence in the corridor had been recorded by a camera that Vale had not known was live until Logan told him, and even then, told him specifically so that Vale would calculate correctly and step back rather than act, which he had. Logan thought about this last detail. He had told Vale about the camera not because he needed to. Vale would have calculated the cost of moving against him eventually, regardless. But because the faster Vale reached the correct calculation, the smaller the window for a decision Vale might have regretted in ways that Logan did not want to be the cause of. There was a version of this afternoon where Logan said nothing, where the confrontation resolved less cleanly, where someone made a decision based on incomplete information that couldn't be undone. He had offered the information because it was the move that produced the best outcome for the most people, including Vale's 2 associates, who were probably private contractors doing a job they'd been hired for without full knowledge of what they were protecting. You managed what you could manage. You gave people accurate information and let them make better decisions when better decisions were available to them. This was not a philosophy he had named or formalized. It was just how he had learned to move through difficult situations, not with force first, but with clarity, and force available if clarity failed. The door to Sophie's room opened and Audrey came into the corridor. She pulled it partially closed behind her and leaned against the wall beside him, which was a less composed posture than she usually maintained, and therefore felt more honest than most of their interactions. "She's been out for 40 minutes, Audrey said. "Properly out. The nurse said she'll probably sleep through dinner." "Good," Logan said. She needs it. Audrey looked at the far wall. Gerald told me about the corridor, the full account. She paused. You told Vale the camera was live. Yes. Why? Because it was the move that got everyone out of the situation without someone doing something they couldn't take back. He looked at her. Vale is going to face consequences for what he did. Those consequences are going to be significant and appropriately applied. I didn't need to add anything to them by letting the afternoon get worse than it needed to be. Audrey was quiet for a moment. Most people in your position would have wanted him to try something, would have wanted the justification. I'm aware of that, Logan said. I'm not most people in that position. She looked at him with the expression he had been seeing at intervals since the night before, the trying to understand expression, the one where she was assembling something. He had stopped feeling like a subject under analysis when she wore it. It had started feeling more like conversation. Audrey. He said her name because it was the right way to start what he was about to say. I want to be direct with you about something. She turned to look at him fully. All right. The work I did today, at the building, the corridor, the conversation with Vale, I did that because it needed to be done and I was the person who could do it. Not because I owe you anything, not because... He stopped, reorganized. I want to be clear about the terms because I think you're building toward an offer of some kind and I want you to understand my position before you make it. She absorbed this without visible reaction, which was its own kind of reaction. Go on. If you offer me money, I'll decline. If you offer me a title or a position as compensation for the last 2 days, I'll decline that too, because both of those things would change the nature of what happened into a transaction, and what happened wasn't a transaction. He paused. Sophie needed someone in that building, and I went. That's complete. What comes after it should be. It should be its own thing, whatever it is, on its own terms. Audrey was quiet for a long moment, long enough that he couldn't entirely read what was happening behind it. What if the thing I want to offer, she said finally, is not compensation, but continuation? He waited. The rehabilitation center is going to be rebuilt, she said. Every compromised section, full remediation, starting with the structural elements. I'm going to create an independent safety oversight program, emergency preparedness, building systems integrity, a direct reporting line to me that bypasses the project management structure. She looked at the wall. I need someone to run it. Someone who reads buildings the way you read them. Someone who understands what a safety system is actually for, as opposed to what it looks like on a compliance checklist. Logan said nothing. Not as a thank you, she said. Not as compensation for the past 2 days, because we need someone who is actually qualified, and I have now observed you be qualified in approximately 14 different ways over the course of 20 hours, and I am not willing to pretend I haven't noticed. She paused. The position would have authority, real authority, direct access to every Carrington project, hiring authority for the safety staff, budget authority for remediation recommendations. Another pause. And it is a day job. You would be home every evening. He looked at Sophie's door. I'd want to talk to Gerald, he said, about what the actual scope of the role would look like day to day. Not the version of it you're describing right now, which is the version framed to appeal to me specifically. It is framed to appeal to you specifically, she said. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I know you're not. Is that a problem? It's honest, he said. I can work with honest. She turned to look at him. The corridor light was not flattering to anyone, the flat institutional fluorescence that made everything look slightly more exhausted than it was. But she looked at him with the same directness she had in the hospital garden that morning, in the family room at 3 in the morning, at every point when the professional performance had gone quiet and the actual person had been in the room instead. I was wrong about you, she said, at the Hartwell, before it happened. I looked at you and I made a decision based on... She stopped. Based on what I thought I knew about what a person in that room was supposed to look like. And I was wrong. I want you to know that I understand that I was wrong, not just in the sense of factual error, but in the sense of what it costs when that kind of error is wrong about a person. He looked at her steadily. I know. You keep saying that. Because you keep telling me things I already understood, he said. Which means you're not telling me for my information. You're telling me because you need to say it. She exhaled slowly. Yes. Then say it until you're done, he said simply. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for another moment, and then she looked at Sophie's door and she said, I spent 6 years trusting Preston Vale. I spent 6 years in the same boardrooms and the same project reviews and the same due diligence meetings, and I did not see it. I am supposed to be the person who sees these things, and I did not see it. You saw it when you needed to, Logan said. Immediately. You didn't wait and you didn't protect the relationship at the expense of the problem. When it was in front of you, you moved on it. That's a generous reading. It's what happened. She was quiet again. Outside, down the corridor, Maddie appeared from the family room doorway, assessed the situation. 2 adults in a corridor having a conversation that she seemed to accurately determine she didn't need to interrupt, and disappeared back inside with the social grace of a child who was more perceptive than most adults wanted to fully reckon with. She's remarkable, Audrey said, watching the empty doorway where Maddie had been. She is, Logan said. She got that independently of anything I did. That's not true, Audrey said. The way a child becomes what she's becoming, that doesn't happen independently. It happens because of what they live inside every day. Logan said nothing to this because there was nothing to say to it that wouldn't either agree too readily or deflect too sharply, and he didn't want to do either. They sat in the corridor for a while, the 2 of them, with Sophie sleeping behind the half-open door and Maddie reading in the family room and the hospital moving around them in its steady, tired, ongoing way. Not comfortable, exactly, but real. The way things were real when the performance had stopped and the difficulty had passed, and what was left was just people, with their histories and their failures and the specific way they had come to be in the same corridor on the same November afternoon. Talk to Gerald, Audrey said eventually. About the position. I will. And Logan. She said his name the way he had said hers, as a marker. Whatever you decide. What you did for Sophie. What you did today. She stopped. Found the words she wanted. I'm not going to forget what I was wrong about, or what it meant that you didn't use it against me. He looked at her. You had every reason to, she said, when I ordered you out. You could have told security you had the invitation. You could have made the point. You didn't. The point wasn't worth making at the time, he said. It was worth making. Maybe, he said, but that's not the kind of right I'm interested in being. She looked at him for a long moment. Something settled in her face, not resolution, not conclusion, but the particular quieting of something that had been running hard and was, for the first time, allowed to stop. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Down the hall, from the family room, came the sound of Maddie's voice asking Renata something about dinner, and whether the hospital cafeteria had anything that qualified as real food, and whether Sophie would be allowed to have visitors when she woke up. All 3 questions delivered in rapid succession without waiting for answers, which was Maddie's conversational style and always had been. Logan stood up. I should check on her, he said. Yes, Audrey said. Go. He walked down the corridor toward his daughter's voice, and behind him Audrey turned back to Sophie's door and pushed it gently open and went inside, and the corridor was quiet again, holding nothing more than the ordinary sounds of a building. Doing what buildings were supposed to do, keeping people safe while they rested. For now, that was enough. Preston Vale was arrested on a Thursday morning in late November, 11 days after the fire at the Hartwell Grand. He was taken from the lobby of his Midtown office building at 8:40 in the morning, which was either an accident of timing or a deliberate choice by the DA's office to execute the arrest at the moment most visible to the people who worked with him and for him, and had trusted the same face Logan had seen in that corridor, calm, controlled, the face of a man who managed risk from a safe distance. The charges were substantial: wire fraud, securities fraud, criminal negligence, conspiracy to obstruct a regulatory inspection, and 4 additional counts related to the materials substitution across 3 prior projects. His 2 associates from the rehabilitation center were arrested the same morning at separate locations. Dwyer, the site coordinator, had retained an attorney 2 days after the corridor confrontation and was cooperating with the DA's office by the end of that first week, which accelerated the timeline considerably. Logan heard about the arrest from Gerald, who called at 9:15 with the characteristic economy of a man who understood that information was most useful when delivered without editorial addition. Logan was at the residential complex on Archer Avenue at the time, one of the 6 Carrington Vale joint projects flagged for full materials assessment. Reviewing the engineering team's preliminary findings on the 3rd and 4th floor structural elements with a clipboard in his hand, and the kind of attention that made the lead engineer, a 20-year veteran named Paulson, comment afterward that he had never had a safety director who actually read the load calculations. He was not yet formally the safety director. He had talked to Gerald 3 times and Audrey twice and had asked for 2 weeks to think about it, and Audrey had said 2 weeks was reasonable, and it was now day 11, and he had not yet formally accepted or declined. And if he was being honest with himself, which he tried to be imperfectly, like most people, he had already made the decision and was giving himself the 2 weeks to make sure the decision was coming from the right place rather than from the particular gravity that Audrey Carrington exerted on situations she was part of. She was someone who made things happen around her the way large objects bent light. It was not manipulation exactly. It was more like the natural result of extraordinary competence and very clear intention operating in the same space. People moved toward her conclusions the way water moved toward low ground, not because they were pushed, but because the terrain made it the logical direction. Logan was aware of this. He was also aware that being aware of it did not make him immune to it. "Vale's in custody," Gerald said on the phone. "His attorneys filed for bail this morning. The DA is opposing." "Good," Logan said. "Audrey would like you to come to the office this afternoon if you're available. The engineering team has a consolidated findings report ready, and she wants you in the room for it." "I'll be there at 2, Logan said. He put the phone back in his pocket and looked at the structural report in his hand. Page 14, 3rd floor eastern facade, where the load-bearing connection between 2 primary beams had been made with grade C hardware specified as grade A in the project documentation. A substitution that the engineering team estimated reduced the joint's load capacity by approximately 31% compared to code requirement. He stood in that half-finished corridor and read the number again. 31%. In a residential building where families lived, where children had bedrooms and kitchens and the ordinary trust that the ceiling above them was what it was supposed to be. He thought about Maddie's room in their apartment on 48th Street. The water-stained ceiling tile in the upper left corner that he had replaced himself last spring. The way she had watched him do it from the doorway with her sketchbook against her chest, drawing the process, because Maddie drew everything, the maintenance of things, the repair of things, the quiet ongoing work of making sure the world around her was structurally sound. I thought she understood that work better than most adults did. "Paulson," he said. The engineer looked up from the laptop. "Flag every connection point on this floor where the hardware specification doesn't match the installed materials," Logan said. "I want a complete inventory before the remediation crew starts. Not just the obvious discrepancies, everything that diverges from the original design spec by any margin." "That's going to take most of the day," Paulson said. "Yes," Logan said. "It is." The Carrington development offices occupied the 31st through 33rd floors of a building on Park Avenue that Logan had never visited before the previous week, and which he was still, on this particular Thursday, slightly surprised to find himself walking into with a building site badge and a standing appointment with the CEO. Renata met him at the elevator as she had the previous 2 times. Not because Audrey required him to be escorted, but because the 31st floor had a layout that was not intuitive on a first or second visit, and Renata had apparently decided that she was going to make sure Logan Barrett did not spend 20 minutes finding the right conference room, which was a kindness delivered in the practical, unsentimental mode that seemed to be Renata's primary emotional register. "She's finishing a call," Renata said. 5 minutes. Coffee? Please. He sat in the conference room with the engineering consolidated report and the Archer Avenue findings he'd carried from the morning site visit, and a coffee that was considerably better than the hospital machine's output. And he looked out the window at 31 floors of New York afternoon and thought, not for the first time, that the city looked different from up here. Not better or worse, just different, the way any system looked different when you changed your position within it. He had spent 12 years in positions that required him to look at terrain from every available angle before moving through it. He had spent the subsequent 4 years deliberately choosing ground level, the maintenance floor, the service corridor, the basement equipment room, because ground level was where the actual structural truth of a building lived, where you could put your hand on something and know whether it was solid or not. Both things had value. He understood that more clearly now than he had 3 weeks ago, sitting on a concrete bench in a hospital garden reading a building plan on his phone. Audrey came in at 2:08, which was 8 minutes later than she'd estimated when they'd scheduled the meeting, which was the first time in 11 days of working interactions that she had been late for anything. She looked like someone who had taken 11 days of considerable pressure and compressed them into the particular tautness of a person who was managing everything and had not yet allowed herself to stop managing it. "Sorry," she said. "The call ran over." "It's fine," he said. "Sit down." She sat. She looked at the report. Archer Avenue? Third and fourth floors. The structural connections are more compromised than the initial scan suggested. Paulson's team is doing a full inventory today. Best estimate for safe remediation timeline is 6 to 8 weeks, which means the families in units 22 through 41 need temporary housing. She nodded without hesitation. "I'll have the relocation team contact the residents today. Full hotel coverage and moving assistance, Carrington's cost." She was already making a note. "What else?" "The Meridian Street project is worse," Logan said. "The electrical systems there match the Hartwell pattern. Grade C materials installed throughout, signed off as Grade A. The difference is Meridian is a medical outpatient facility, not a residential building. Nobody's living there, but the patient load during operating hours is—" "I know what it is," she said quietly. 40 to 60 patients a day. Outpatient rehab services, half of them elderly. "The facility needs to close for inspection before it reopens," he said. "I'd recommend a full shutdown notification to the city today before we finish our own assessment, because the city needs to be ahead of this rather than reactive to it. We'll notify by end of business." She wrote it down. "The PR team is going to—" "The PR team can manage it," Logan said, "but the notification goes out accurately, not a proactive safety review framing. A materials deficiency assessment. Full stop." She looked up at him. "If the framing is managed instead of accurate, and the city finds the discrepancy later, everything you're trying to protect becomes harder to protect," he said. "Your name means what it means because it says accurate things. This is an accurate thing." She held his gaze for a moment. "You're right." "I know." The corner of her mouth moved, just slightly. "You do that on purpose." "What?" "Say 'I know' instead of 'thank you' when I agree with you." "Thank you implies I wasn't sure," he said. "I was sure." She looked at him for another moment and then looked at the report, and the corner of her mouth was still doing the almost smile thing, which Logan had been cataloging without actively trying to, the way he cataloged everything, because it was how his brain worked, and because that specific expression had started to mean something in his internal reference system that he was not yet prepared to fully define. "The DA's office called this morning," she said, returning to business with the pivot that was characteristic of her. Not abrupt, but clean, the kind of transition that communicated that the previous moment had been received and was now complete. Vale's bail application was denied. The financial documentation from the drives was sufficient for the court to determine flight risk. "Gerald told me." "There are going to be civil proceedings," she said, "on top of the criminal. Multiple parties. His investors, the project municipalities, potentially the families in the affected buildings, through a class action that an attorney in Brooklyn is apparently already organizing." She paused. "It's going to be a long process." "Yes," he said. "It is. My attorneys estimate 2 to 3 years before the full legal landscape is settled, during which time every project gets remediated, every family gets made right, and every compromise certification gets corrected and re-inspected by independent parties." She said it with the flatness of things already decided. "Whatever it costs." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "You're going to keep saying that. Until you stop telling me things I already know, yes." She exhaled, and it had a slightly different quality from her usual exhalations, less controlled, more human. "Logan, the position. Have you decided?" He had decided, as he had known for several days. But he took a moment anyway, not because he was uncertain, but because the moment deserved to be inhabited rather than hurried through. "I'll take it," he said. "On the terms we discussed. Direct reporting line, real authority on remediation recommendations, hiring authority for the safety staff." "Yes." "And I'm home every evening by 6. That's not a negotiating point I would ever argue against," she said. "I know you wouldn't," he said. "I'm saying it anyway." She nodded. 6 o'clock every evening, non-negotiable. She paused. One more thing. The staff I'd be allocating to the safety program. I want to include veterans outreach as part of the recruitment pipeline. Men and women coming out of military, medical, and engineering roles. There's a population of people who have exactly the skill set this work requires, and who are currently underemployed in contexts that don't use what they know. Logan looked at her. This was not something he had suggested. It was something she had arrived at herself, and the fact that she had arrived at it told him something specific about how she had been thinking since the night of the Hartwell, what she had been putting together, what she had been understanding, not just about him, but about the category of person he represented, and the particular waste of having those people disappear into situations that didn't use what they carried. That's a good idea, he said. I have them occasionally, she said, without irony. Sophie came home from the hospital on the 4th day. The headaches lasted another week, which she bore with the particular combination of complaint and stoicism that was entirely consistent with her character as Logan had come to understand it. She was not quiet about discomfort, but she was not defeated by it either. She went back to school on the 8th day, 2 days ahead of the doctor's recommendation, and her teacher sent Audrey a note saying that Sophie had delivered an account of the fire to her 3rd grade class that was, in the teacher's words, extremely detailed and possibly slightly dramatized in certain sections. Maddie and Sophie had exchanged phone numbers at the hospital, which Logan discovered when he found Maddie at the kitchen table one evening doing homework with her phone propped against her pencil case, texting Sophie between math problems with the rapid-fire efficiency of a child who had been waiting her whole life to have a friend who texted at the same speed she thought. He made dinner while this happened. He did not comment on it. The following Saturday, Audrey brought Sophie to the apartment for what had been framed as a study session, but it immediately became something else, as most activities involving Maddie became something else, because Maddie had a gift for redirecting events toward whatever she was actually interested in, which on this particular Saturday was showing Sophie the 74 drawings she had made of the hospital, the corridor, Logan working on the HVAC panel, the pigeons in the garden, and a detailed architectural cross-section of the rehabilitation center's 3rd floor that she had produced from memory based on Logan's description, which was anatomically more accurate than any 8-year-old's work had a right to be. Sophie sat cross-legged on Maddie's bedroom floor and went through the drawings one by one with the focused attention of a child encountering something genuinely new. You draw like you're trying to remember things, Sophie said. I am, Maddie said. I draw everything so I can keep it. Do you draw your dad? All the time. Maddie produced a sketchbook from under the bed and opened it to a page in the middle. Sophie looked at the drawing. It was Logan at the kitchen table, coffee in hand, reading something on his phone, face turned slightly so the light from the window caught the left side of it. It was a good drawing. It was, in its specific and unguarded accuracy, a portrait of someone paying very close attention to a person they loved. Sophie looked at it for a long moment. My mom doesn't have anyone drawing her, she said. It was not said with sadness exactly, more with the matter-of-fact observation of a child reporting a gap. Maddie considered this. I could draw her, she said. She'd say she was too busy. She's not too busy right now, Maddie said. She's in the kitchen with my dad. Sophie looked at the closed bedroom door, then back at Maddie. They're talking. They talk a lot now. I know, Sophie said. She looked at the drawing of Logan again. Do you mind? That they talk? Yeah. Maddie thought about it with the genuine consideration she gave to questions that deserved it. No, she said. My dad talks to other people. He just usually doesn't talk like that. Like what? Like he's not trying to sound like anything, Maddie said. Sophie absorbed this. Then, my mom talks differently with him too. She doesn't say everything at the front. She waits. That's better, Maddie said. I know, Sophie said. She doesn't always do it. They sat with the sketchbook between them in the particular companionable silence of 2 children who had arrived at the conclusion that the adult situation was proceeding adequately and required no intervention from them. In the kitchen, Logan was making coffee. He hadn't asked Audrey if she wanted, and Audrey was sitting on the far side of the small kitchen table watching him do it, which was a thing that had been happening in various configurations over the past 2 weeks. One or both of them in a space, not doing anything in particular, talking or not talking, with a specific ease that neither of them had named and both of them understood. The Meridian Street facility reopens next week, she said. Full inspection, new certification, independent review. Paulson's team signed off yesterday. I saw the report, Logan said. It's good work. Your work, she said. You caught the electrical discrepancy on the second inspection walk. Paulson caught it. I was standing next to him when he caught it. You asked the question that made him look at the right panel. He poured the coffee and put a mug in front of her. She hadn't asked for it. She picked it up and wrapped both hands around it, which was something he had noticed she did when she was allowing herself to sit still, not as a performance of relaxation, but as an actual, occasional concession to it. Dwyer testified yesterday, she said. Gerald briefed me this morning. How comprehensive. Comprehensive enough that Vale's defense team is apparently reconsidering their strategy. She looked at the coffee. Dwyer says Vale described the electrical event at the Hartwell as managed risk. Those were the words. Managed risk. She paused. Sophie was in that building. I know, Logan said. He knew Sophie was going to be there. He knew I would have Sophie with me. He put a timed failure in a building where my daughter was attending an event and called it managed risk because his actuarial model said the probability of a child being harmed was low enough to accept. Yes, Logan said. He didn't soften it. She wasn't asking him to. I've been in business for 10 years, she said. I have accepted risk on behalf of companies and projects and investments. I have made decisions where the downside was real, and I accepted that the downside was real and moved forward anyway. I understand risk management. She looked up at him. What he did is not risk management. It's a different thing. It's deciding that other people's children are acceptable casualties in your margin calculation. Yes, Logan said again. How did you, for 12 years, how did you make decisions like that? Decisions where the downside was, she stopped, reorganized. I don't mean the decisions the way he made them. I mean the other kind, the ones where the risk was to yourself. How do you make those? He sat down across from her. He thought about the question as the question she was actually asking, which was not about military service exactly, and not about the corridor at the rehabilitation center, but about the specific nature of choosing to go towards something difficult rather than away from it when going away was an available option. You don't make the decision once, he said. That's the thing that looks different from the outside. People think there's a moment where you decide to be the kind of person who does a certain kind of thing, and then every instance of that thing comes from the same decision. He shook his head. That's not how it works. Every time is its own choice. Every corridor, every building, every situation where the easier thing and the right thing are pointed in different directions. He looked at the coffee. You practice choosing the right one until it's faster than choosing the other one. But it doesn't stop being a choice. She listened to this with the quality of attention she had when she was actually taking something in rather than processing it for response. The night of the Hartwell, she said, when you handed Maddie to the security guard. Was it fast? Yes. Were you afraid of getting it wrong? Yes, he said. Always. But you went. But I went. She held the coffee mug for a moment. I don't know how to be afraid of getting something wrong and still move forward, she said. I know how to be certain. I know how to be decisive when I have enough information. I know how to move fast when I've already concluded. She paused. The thing where you move without being certain. I don't know how to do that. You did it that night, he said. What did I do that night? You tried to follow me into the smoke, he said. Security stopped you, but you were going. She looked at him. I was going for Sophie. Yes, he said. That's the only reason anyone goes. There's always a Sophie. Something that matters enough that the alternative to going is worse than the risk of going. He met her eyes. You know how to do it. You just haven't had to practice it very often because you've built a life where you control enough of the variables that the uncalculated risk doesn't appear very often. And now it has, she said. And now it has, he said. She looked at him for a long moment across the kitchen table. The small kitchen table in the apartment that cost more in rent than he'd like because it was close to Maddie's school, and the walk was safe. The apartment with the replaced ceiling tile in Maddie's room, and the bookshelves that were full, because Maddie read faster than the library could keep up. The ordinary ground-level life of a man who had chosen deliberately and not without cost. Logan, she said, Yeah. I'm not building toward anything right now, she said. I'm not framing a point or managing toward a conclusion. I just want to. She stopped. I want to say that I am glad you didn't leave that night, when security came. I'm glad you were still in the building when the lights went out. She paused. And I am aware that I almost made sure you weren't. You didn't make sure, he said. I stayed. Because of Maddie being tired. Because I decided to stay, he said simply. The reason was Maddie. The decision was mine. She absorbed this. You're not going to let me take full responsibility for that near miss. You had a piece of it, he said. You've owned your piece. The rest of it is just what happened. She looked at him for another long moment and then looked away, at the window, at the afternoon light coming through it at an angle that had been shifting gradually since 2 o'clock. And she said, I haven't had this. In a long time. Had what? This, she said, gesturing slightly with the mug. A kitchen. An afternoon. Coffee that I didn't ask for, and didn't have to ask for. She paused. Someone who doesn't perform anything. He didn't say anything to this. I haven't let myself have it, she corrected. That's more accurate. I've had the buildings and the board, and the quarterly reports, and Sophie's recitals, and the school calendar, and the security detail, and every managed, scheduled, controlled element of a life that I constructed very deliberately to make sure that nothing in it could be disrupted by something I hadn't anticipated. She exhaled. And then a building caught fire. Buildings do that, Logan said. And a man I had told security to remove walked back in. He did, Logan said. Poor judgment on his part. She looked at him. The almost smile was fully present now. Not almost, actually present, and different from the versions he had seen in the previous 2 weeks, in that it had no performance in it, no management, no corporate finish. Just a person sitting across a kitchen table smiling at something they found genuinely funny. Terrible judgment, she said. The worst, he agreed. The Carrington Children's Recovery Center opened the following April, on a Thursday morning when the weather had not fully committed to spring, and the sky was the particular indeterminate gray of a city still making up its mind. There were no velvet ropes. This had been Logan's suggestion at the planning meeting for the opening, delivered as a practical observation rather than a philosophical statement. Velvet ropes at a children's rehabilitation center sent a message that was inconsistent with the facility's purpose, and Audrey had agreed before he finished the sentence. Families came through the main entrance in the same line as the nurses and the construction workers who had built the place, and the veterans who had been among the first staff hired for the safety and emergency preparedness program that Logan had spent 5 months building from an open position and a budget into something that worked. The program had 12 staff members by opening day. 8 of them had military backgrounds. All of them could read a building the way Logan read a building, which was to say, not as an aesthetic object, but as a system, with load-bearing points and failure modes and the particular kind of honesty that only revealed itself when you got close enough to put your hand on it. Logan stood near the back of the main lobby during the opening, which was where he had been standing at every event he'd attended since age 9. Not from shyness exactly, but from the habit of keeping his back to a wall and his sight lines clear. He had Maddie beside him. She had her sketchbook. She was drawing the room. He watched families come through the doors and find their way to the information desk where a nurse named Castillo, former Army medic, hired in February, answered their questions with the patient, specific clarity of someone who had explained difficult things in bad conditions and understood that clarity was its own form of care. He watched Sophie find Maddie from across the lobby and navigate toward them through the crowd with the directness of a child who had identified her destination and saw no reason to take the indirect route. She was fully recovered, had been for 3 months, the headaches gone by December, the bandage gone by the end of November. And she moved through the room with the particular forward energy of a 9-year-old who had been conscious of her own survival for the past 5 months and had decided, without making it dramatic, to take the fact of being alive fairly seriously. Maddie, she said, arriving, I found the piano room. There's an actual grand piano. Mom said we can go look at it after the ribbon thing. Is it a real ribbon? Maddie asked. Or just a ceremony ribbon? I think it's real. It's red. I want to see the ribbon, Maddie said to Logan. I heard, he said. Can we go to the front? After the ceremony. Sophie looked up at Logan with Audrey's eyes. She's looking for you, she said. Mom, she was looking across the room. I'm right here, Logan said. I know, Sophie said. I'm telling you so you can go find her. He looked at the 9-year-old for a moment. She looked back with complete equanimity. He found Audrey near the entrance to the East Wing corridor, which was fully finished now, ceiling panels installed, wall coverings complete, the HVAC system calibrated by Paulson's team 3 weeks ago and certified by 2 independent inspectors. The electrical systems rebuilt from the junction boxes out with grade A materials and triple verified documentation at every stage. The corridor smelled like fresh paint and something cleaner underneath, the specific smell of a building that had been built correctly. She was wearing a dark blazer over a blue dress, and she looked, as she usually looked in a room, like the person who was running it. Not by posture or performance, but by the particular clarity of someone who understood exactly what this place was for and had spent 6 months making sure it was built right enough to be trusted with it. She saw him when he was still 12 feet away. You were in the back, she said. I like the back. I know you like the back. I was looking for you. Sophie told me. She glanced at Sophie across the lobby, who was examining the ceremonial ribbon with Maddie with the focused attention of 2 children who had decided this was worth their time. She's not subtle. She's 9, Logan said. Subtle is a skill you build. She's had other skills since birth. She'll get to subtle eventually. She looked at him. The program. Today. How does it look? It looks like what it is. It is, he said. A building built right, staffed right, for the right purpose. That's what I wanted to hear. It's accurate. I know it's accurate. She paused. I wanted to hear you say it. He looked at her steadily, in the lobby of the building that had been rebuilt from the inside out, that bore her name on the entrance and her money in its walls, and her intention in the fact that every material in it was exactly what the documentation said it was and had been verified by people whose entire professional purpose was to ensure that the families walking through its doors could trust the ceiling above them. You built something good, he said, in the right way, with the right people. He paused. You should let that be enough for today. She held his gaze. It's enough, she said. Today it's enough. He believed her, because she said things she meant and meant things she said, and he had learned this about her over the past 5 months, the way you learn the true load-bearing elements of a structure, not from the documentation, but from putting weight on things and seeing what held. The ribbon was cut at 11:15. Maddie drew the scissors. Sophie played 4 bars of something on the grand piano in the activity room with the door open so the sound carried into the corridor, and a group of children waiting with their parents for intake appointments stopped and listened, which was probably not what the opening schedule had anticipated, but was considerably better than what the schedule had anticipated. Afterward, Logan stood outside on the building's small terrace with the cold April air and the indeterminate sky and the sounds of the building doing what it was supposed to do. Holding people, keeping them safe, giving them a place to recover. I thought about a November night 5 months ago, and a man carrying a child through smoke, and a woman who had tried to send him away and had looked at his face when he came back out, and understood, in that moment, something about how wrong a certain kind of certainty could be. He thought about Maddie at the kitchen table with her phone propped against her pencil case, texting Sophie between math problems. About Sophie's assessment of Audrey's way of talking, delivered with 9-year-old accuracy to Maddie's sketchbook-covered bedroom floor. About the 2 girls at the ribbon ceremony, deciding together that the red ribbon was the most important element of the morning and should be documented. He thought about what Audrey had said in the hospital corridor, 11 days after the fire. Whatever you decide, what you did for Sophie. I'm not going to forget what I was wrong about. He had told her it didn't need to be said correctly, just said once. He had meant it. He had also meant something underneath it that he hadn't named then, and was only now, on a cold April terrace with a city sky above him, that still couldn't decide what season it was, fully articulating to himself that being wrong about a person, and knowing it, and not defending the wrongness, was one of the rare and more important things a person could do. Most people, when confronted with evidence that they had misjudged someone, found a way to manage the evidence rather than update the judgment. They softened the narrative, redistributed the blame, reframed the sequence of events until the error was smaller and more forgivable and less structurally significant than it had actually been. Audrey had not done this. She had looked at what she had done and named it accurately, and then done the harder thing of standing in front of the person she'd done it to and saying, "I know what that was." He did not know what he would have done if she hadn't. He suspected he would have returned to the apartment on 48th Street and the maintenance schedule and the open work orders, and the careful, sufficient life he had built with Maddie, and let the whole thing become a story that Maddie drew in her sketchbook, and that he did not think about more than occasionally. He would have been all right. He had learned, over the course of some difficulty, to be all right, but this was better than all right. He was honest enough with himself to know that. The terrace door opened behind him. He didn't turn. He knew the footstep. Audrey stood beside him and looked at the same gray sky. "Maddie and Sophie are arguing about what the piano song was," she said. "Sophie says it was a piece by a composer whose name Maddie can't pronounce. Maddie says it sounded like something from a movie." "Who's winning?" "Sophie knows more about music. Maddie is more confident. It's unresolved." He smiled, which was a thing he did without calculation when the occasion was genuinely funny, and he was in the presence of someone he didn't need to manage his face for. Audrey looked at him sideways. "You should do that more," she said. "Do what?" "That," she said simply. He looked at the sky. "The girls are going to be fine," he said. "Whatever happens, they're going to be fine." "I know," she said. "Sophie is going to run something someday, a company or a hospital or a country. I haven't determined which yet. A country seems excessive. Maybe. I'm keeping it as a possibility." She was quiet for a moment. "Then, what about Maddie?" "She's going to draw the world," he said. "Every part of it that she can reach. She's going to document everything so she can keep it." He paused. "She's going to be the most attentive person in any room she enters for the rest of her life. And most people won't notice that, and a few people will notice it and find it extraordinary." "Sophie noticed it," Audrey said, "in the first hour." "Sophie's perceptive," he said. "Family trait." He felt her look at him at the edge of his vision. He kept his eyes on the sky. "Logan," she said. "Yeah. I'm not building toward anything right now." "I know. I want to be here," she said. "On this terrace. With you. For a minute before we go back inside." "All right," he said. They stood on the terrace in the cold April air, the two of them, while inside the building families moved through corridors that had been rebuilt right, and two girls argued about a piano piece, and 12 staff members in the safety and emergency preparedness program went about the quiet, ongoing work of making sure the structure held. It is a particular kind of wisdom, though it rarely announces itself as wisdom, to understand that the most important things are not the dramatic ones. They are not the fires or the frauds or the confrontations in smoke-filled corridors. Those are the events that reveal character, but they are not where character is built. Character is built in the ordinary repetitions, the dinners made, the shoes retied, the ceilings replaced, the conversations held past midnight in hospital family rooms, the decisions made every day to choose the right thing over the easier thing even when no one is watching and no one will know, and the only witness is yourself. Logan Barrett had spent 12 years learning to move through the world at the hardest possible pace, and then had spent 4 years learning to move through it at a pace that left room for an 8-year-old who drew everything so she could keep it. Both educations had been necessary. Both had cost something real. What he had now was neither the 12 years nor the 4 years, but the specific person those years had made. Someone who read buildings and people and situations with the same patient, grounded attention, someone who distributed credit and not blame and moved toward difficult things when moving toward them was what the situation required. Audrey Carrington had built an empire on the certainty that she could control enough variables to prevent the uncalculated risk from appearing. And then the uncalculated risk had appeared, as it always eventually does, and she had found out what she was made of when the calculus was gone, and there was nothing left but the raw situation and the decision about what to do with it. She had been wrong about a man, and she had known it, and she had said so, and she had done the work of being right instead. These are not small things. In a world that generally rewards the management of appearances over the correction of actual errors, they are quite large things, done quietly, in corridors and hospital rooms and kitchen tables and April terraces, with no audience but the people they were done for. 6 months later, in the rooftop garden of the building that bore her name and his standard and the work of everyone who had rebuilt it. Right, Audrey Carrington and Logan Barrett were married in front of 40 people, none of whom were there because of obligation or optics or the particular calculus of who needed to be present. Maddie wore a yellow dress and drew the ceremony in her sketchbook. Sophie played the first piece she had ever memorized on the piano, which Maddie had correctly identified as something from a movie, and which Sophie had correctly identified as a work by a composer whose name Maddie still could not pronounce. There were no reporters. There was no announcement. There was just a rooftop, and a family that had been built by choice out of difficulty and honesty, and the specific grace of people who looked at what they had done wrong and chose to do differently. And two girls who had decided in a hospital room and a bedroom floor conversation that this outcome was satisfactory and required no further intervention from them. Logan was home by 6 o'clock every evening. This was not a small thing either. It was, in fact, the whole point.